Have you ever fallen in love with someone's beautiful soul after witnessing a single dance that awakened your heart? A millionaire father's world transformed when a waitress gracefully danced with his disabled son, igniting an unexpected romance that would change their lives forever. The chandeliers of the Grand Horizon Hotel's ballroom cast a golden glow over the charity gala, but to Maxwell Richardson, it might as well have been a prison cell illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Despite being surrounded by hundreds of guests in designer evening wear, champagne flutes clinking, and string quartet music floating through the air, he had never felt more alone. At 52, Maxwell had built an empire worth billions, but what good was all that wealth when the only person who truly mattered to him was suffering? His eyes drifted to the corner of the ballroom where his 19-year-old son, Elijah, sat in his wheelchair, his shoulders hunched forward, eyes downcast. The boy's caretaker had stepped away momentarily, leaving Elijah isolated amid the swirling crowd that seemed to instinctively part around him like water around a stone. Maxwell's heart clenched. 3 years had passed since the accident that had claimed both Elijah's mobility and his mother's life, yet the pain remained as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. Maxwell checked his Patek Philippe watch. Barely an hour had passed. He'd promised Elijah they would stay until the donation ceremony at least, knowing how much his son valued the foundation's work with spinal injury research. But watching Elijah's isolation was becoming unbearable. He began weaving through the crowd toward his son, nodding curtly at acquaintances who attempted to engage him in conversation. "Mr. Richardson, just the man I wanted to see." Thomas Blackwell, one of his company's largest investors, stepped directly into his path. "I've been meaning to discuss the Shanghai project with you. Have you considered my proposal about—" "Not tonight, Thomas," Maxwell interrupted, his eyes never leaving Elijah's slumped figure. "Family matters." Thomas followed his gaze and his expression softened momentarily before a practiced smile returned. Of course, but do call me Monday. The board is getting anxious about the delays." Maxwell barely registered the words as he continued toward Elijah. The business empire that had once been his sole focus now felt like an annoying distraction from what truly mattered. When had he become so detached from everything he'd built? Probably the same moment he'd watched his wife's casket being lowered into the ground while Elijah sat beside him, silent tears streaming down his face, his useless legs a cruel reminder of all they had lost. "Hey, buddy," Maxwell said, crouching beside Elijah's wheelchair. "How are you holding up?" Elijah's eyes, so like his mother's, lifted to meet his father's. They were the same shade of hazel that had once captivated Maxwell from across a university library 25 years ago. "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." Maxwell knew better. The emotional exhaustion in his son's voice went far beyond physical fatigue. "We can leave if you want. I can make our donation privately." "No," Elijah said firmly. "I want to be here. Dr. Larson's research might help people like me someday. I just wish—" His voice trailed off as his gaze drifted to the dance floor where couples swayed to the music. Maxwell followed his son's gaze, understanding the unspoken desire. Before the accident, Elijah had been an athlete. Swimming, running track, always in motion. Dancing had been another passion, one he'd inherited from his mother. Maxwell remembered how Catherine would pull their teenage son into impromptu dance sessions in their kitchen, both of them laughing as they twirled around the island counter while Maxwell watched from the doorway, his heart full. Now those moments existed only in memory. "I'm going to get us some drinks," Maxwell said, squeezing his son's shoulder gently. "What would you like?" "Just water, please." Maxwell made his way to the bar, his thoughts heavy. He'd tried everything to bring joy back into Elijah's life. Specialists from around the world, experimental treatments, adaptive sports programs. Nothing seemed to penetrate the shell of resignation that had formed around his once vibrant son. "Sparkling water and a scotch. Neat," he told the bartender, a young woman with curly black hair pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "Right away, sir," she replied with a warm smile that momentarily caught him off guard. In his world of calculated business relationships and society's practiced politeness, genuine warmth had become rare. As he waited, Maxwell glanced back at Elijah and froze. A young woman in the hotel's catering uniform was kneeling beside his son's wheelchair, saying something that made Elijah's lips curve into a small smile, the first real smile Maxwell had seen in weeks. The bartender followed his gaze. "That's Amara," she said, placing his drinks on the counter. "She's new to our team. Lovely girl." Maxwell watched, transfixed, as the young woman, Amara, gestured animatedly while speaking to Elijah. His son's posture had straightened, his expression engaged for the first time that evening. What magic was this stranger working that he, Elijah's own father, couldn't manage? "Excuse me," Maxwell said, leaving the drinks untouched as he moved closer to observe this unexpected interaction. Amara appeared to be in her mid-20s, with warm brown skin and a slender frame. Her uniform was identical to the other servers, but somehow she wore it with a grace that made it seem like evening attire. As he approached, he caught fragments of their conversation. "So I told him, just because I'm serving food doesn't mean I've forgotten how to count. You should have seen his face when I corrected his math right there at the table," Amara was saying, her hands emphasizing her words. Elijah laughed, actually laughed, and Maxwell nearly stumbled in shock at the sound. "What happened then?" Elijah asked, genuinely interested. "He left me a 30% tip and wouldn't look me in the eye the rest of the night," she concluded with a triumphant grin. "Mathematicians make the worst tippers, I swear." "Amara!" A sharp voice cut through their conversation. An older man in a hotel manager's suit approached with a stern expression. "Tables 7 through 9 need clearing. This isn't social hour." Amara straightened immediately, her smile fading. "Yes, Mr. Pearson. Sorry, Mr. Pearson." She turned to Elijah with an apologetic look. "Duty calls. It was nice talking with you, Elijah." As she turned to leave, Elijah called after her, "Wait." She paused, looking back. "Thank you," he said simply, "for treating me like a person, not a condition." Something flickered across her face, understanding, compassion, connection, before she nodded and hurried away to her duties. Maxwell approached his son, retrieving their forgotten drinks from the bar along the way. "Making friends?" he asked casually, handing Elijah his water. Elijah took a sip before answering. "Her name is Amara Collins. She's working here to pay for dance school." "Dance school?" Maxwell repeated, surprised both by the information and by Elijah's animated tone. "Contemporary and ballet primarily, but she's trained in everything from ballroom to hip-hop. She's auditioning for the National Dance Academy next month." Elijah's eyes followed Amara as she efficiently cleared dishes from abandoned tables. "She saw me watching the dancers and came over to talk." Maxwell sat in the chair beside his son, studying him carefully. "She seems nice." "She is," Elijah agreed, then hesitated before adding, "She didn't stare at the chair or use that awful sympathetic voice everyone puts on. She just talked to me, like I'm normal." The words stabbed at Maxwell's heart. Was that how Elijah felt? That people, that he, treated him as abnormal? Before he could formulate a response, the string quartet transitioned to a slower melody, and more couples drifted onto the dance floor. Elijah's expression clouded again as he watched them. "I miss it," he whispered, so quietly Maxwell almost didn't hear. "Dancing. Mom would have loved this song." Maxwell swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat. Catherine had loved dancing more than anything except her family. Their first date had been at a swing dance class that Maxwell had fumbled through just to spend time with her. Their wedding dance had left guests speechless. Even in the hospital during her final days, she had made him promise to dance with her again in their next life. Across the room, Amara was serving champagne, moving with a subtle grace that suggested her dancer's training. Each step, Each turn of her wrist as she poured seemed choreographed, effortless. An idea struck Maxwell, impulsive, possibly inappropriate, but he couldn't shake it. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Robert, his personal assistant who was monitoring the event from the sidelines. Within moments, Robert appeared at his side. "Sir?" Maxwell leaned in and whispered his request. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Minutes later, Maxwell saw Robert speaking quietly to the hotel manager, who frowned, then glanced toward Maxwell. Whatever Robert said next, likely accompanied by a discreet transfer of funds, changed the manager's expression to one of accommodating agreement. The manager beckoned to Amara, who listened to his instructions with a puzzled look before turning to scan the room. Her eyes found Elijah, then moved to Maxwell, who gave her a subtle nod. She approached their table, her professional demeanor now tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Richardson, I've been told you requested my assistance with something?" Maxwell stood. "Ms. Collins, my son tells me you're a dancer." "Yes, sir, I am." Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, pride evident in her bearing. "I have an unusual request." Maxwell hesitated, suddenly uncertain. What if she refused? What if she thought it strange or demeaning? But looking at Elijah's confused expression, he pressed on. "Would you dance with my son?" Amara blinked, her expression unreadable. Elijah looked up sharply. "Dad, what are you—" "Not a traditional dance," Maxwell clarified quickly, "but perhaps something adapted? I understand if it's not possible, but—" "I'd be honored," Amara interrupted, her voice soft but firm. She turned to Elijah with a smile that held no pity, only genuine warmth. "Would you like to dance with me, Elijah?" Elijah stared at her, then at his father, conflicting emotions crossing his face: hope, fear, embarrassment, longing. "I can't dance," he finally said, gesturing to his wheelchair. "Not anymore." "Dancing isn't just about legs," Amara replied, kneeling to meet his eyes. "It's about expression, connection, feeling the music. Some of the most beautiful dancers I know never stand on their own 2 feet." She held out her hand, a silent invitation. "Trust me?" The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Elijah looked at her outstretched hand. Maxwell felt his heart pounding, afraid he'd made a terrible mistake, pushed too far. Then, slowly, Elijah placed his hand in Amara's. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Show me how." Amara's smile widened. She spoke briefly to the quartet's lead violinist, who nodded and conveyed her request to the other musicians. As they began a new melody, slower, more haunting, Amara wheeled Elijah to a clearer space at the edge of the dance floor. By now, several guests had noticed the unusual scene unfolding and watched with undisguised curiosity. Maxwell felt a flash of protective anger, ready to shut down any sign of mockery or pity directed at his son. But as Amara began to dance around Elijah's wheelchair, that anger dissolved into wonder. She moved like water, flowing around and with the wheelchair as if it were simply another extension of their shared dance space. Her hands would occasionally meet Elijah's, guiding him to extend his arms, to turn the chair in rhythm with her movements. She spun, leapt, and swayed, always returning to Elijah, always maintaining that invisible thread of connection. And Elijah. Maxwell watched in amazement as his son began to respond, his upper body moving with increasing confidence, his hands finding their own graceful patterns. The hesitation in his face gave way to concentration, then to something Maxwell hadn't seen in years: joy, pure, unrestrained joy. The other dancers gradually stopped to watch, forming a circle around the pair. No one whispered or pointed, they simply witnessed the beauty unfolding before them. The music swelled, and Amara executed a series of turns that brought her back to Elijah's side, where she took both his hands and spun his wheelchair in a perfect circle that made him laugh out loud. Maxwell felt something wet on his cheeks, and realized he was crying. Not the bitter tears he'd shed at Catherine's funeral, or the frustrated tears that sometimes came late at night when the weight of helplessness became too much to bear. These were different. Tears of awe, of gratitude, of hope reborn. As the music drew to a close, Amara knelt beside the wheelchair, their foreheads almost touching as they both caught their breath. The room erupted in applause, genuine and enthusiastic. Elijah's face flushed, but his smile remained bright and unfamiliar after so many months of darkness. In that moment, watching his son transformed by a dance he'd thought forever lost to him, Maxwell felt something shift within his own heart. His gaze moved to Amara, this stranger who had given his son back a piece of himself, and found her already looking at him. Their eyes met across the room, and the connection that sparked between them caught him completely off guard. It wasn't just gratitude he felt. It was something deeper, more primal. A recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit who understood that sometimes the most profound acts of love came disguised as simple gestures. Or perhaps it was merely the awakening of a heart that had been dormant since Catherine's death, suddenly reminded that beauty still existed in the world. Whatever it was, Maxwell Richardson knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed irrevocably, all because a waitress had danced with his son. The applause gradually faded, but the energy in the ballroom had irrevocably shifted. Guests who had previously averted their eyes from Elijah now approached with genuine smiles, complimenting the performance. For once, they addressed their comments directly to him rather than speaking to Maxwell as if his son were invisible. "That was extraordinary," gushed a woman Maxwell recognized as the wife of a city councilman. "You two moved together so beautifully. Do you dance often?" Elijah's cheeks remained flushed, but his smile hadn't dimmed. "First time, actually. But I used to dance before my accident." "Well, you haven't lost your sense of rhythm," she said warmly. "Not one bit." As more guests gathered around them, Maxwell watched his son transform before his eyes. The shell that had encased Elijah for 3 years seemed to crack open, revealing glimpses of the confident, engaging young man who had existed before the crash. Maxwell found himself hanging back, allowing Elijah this moment of connection. Amara had slipped away as soon as the applause died down, resuming her duties with the same quiet efficiency. But Maxwell couldn't stop his eyes from tracking her movements across the ballroom. Each time she disappeared into the kitchen or behind a column, he felt an inexplicable tension until she reappeared again. "She's something else, isn't she?" Robert appeared at his side, observing his employer with knowing eyes. Maxwell cleared his throat. "She did a kind thing for my son. I'm grateful." "Of course, sir." Robert's tone was carefully neutral, but Maxwell caught the faint hint of amusement. "Would you like me to arrange payment for her services? Beyond what I've already provided to the manager, I mean." "No," Maxwell said quickly, then reconsidered. "Yes, but discreetly. Find out if she needs anything. For her dance school, perhaps." Robert nodded. "Consider it done. Will you and Elijah be staying for the remainder of the event?" Maxwell looked over at his son, now engaged in animated conversation with a small group that included Dr. Larson, the neurological researcher whose work the gala was supporting. For the first time in months, Elijah seemed fully present, his hands gesturing emphatically as he spoke. "Yes," Maxwell decided. "I think we will." As Robert moved away to handle the arrangements, Maxwell felt a presence at his elbow. He turned to find the hotel manager Pearson hovering with a deferential smile. "Mr. Richardson, sir, I wanted to personally assure you that Ms. Collins' little, performance was an unusual circumstance that won't be repeated. Our staff are generally not permitted to engage so informally with guests. Rest assured she'll be appropriately—" "Stop," Maxwell interrupted, his voice sharp. "Ms. Collins did nothing wrong. In fact, she did something extraordinary for my son. If anyone should be reprimanded, it's me for making the request." Pearson blinked rapidly, recalibrating. "Of course, sir. I simply meant—" "I know exactly what you meant. Maxwell fixed the manager with the same steely gaze that had intimidated boardroom opponents for decades. "Ms. Collins has my highest praise. I trust that's understood?" "Perfectly, Mr. Richardson." Pearson's smile tightened, but he nodded deferentially before retreating. Maxwell sighed, loosening his bow tie slightly. This was why he hated these social functions, the constant posturing, the thinly veiled sycophancy. He was about to go check on Elijah when he spotted Amara emerging from the kitchen carrying a tray of desserts. Before he could reconsider, he found himself walking toward her. She noticed his approach and paused, balancing the tray expertly with one hand. "Mr. Richardson," she acknowledged with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The warmth she'd shown Elijah was notably absent. "Ms. Collins." He suddenly felt awkward, unsure what to say. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my son." "No thanks necessary." She shifted the tray slightly. "Elijah is a natural. He still has music in him." The simple observation struck Maxwell like a physical blow. Of course Elijah still had music in him. Why had he, Elijah's own father, forgotten that? "Nevertheless," Maxwell continued, "what you did it meant a great deal. To both of us." Amara's professional mask softened slightly. "I'm glad. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to serve these before they melt." She moved past him, the subtle scent of vanilla and something floral briefly enveloping him. Maxwell watched her go, aware that their brief exchange had left him more intrigued than before. She hadn't been impressed by his wealth or status, hadn't even acknowledged it. In his world, that was almost unheard of. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, the ceremonial presentation of donations, and networking that Maxwell participated in on autopilot. His attention remained divided between Elijah, who continued to engage with guests with renewed animation, and Amara, who moved through the room with quiet efficiency, occasionally catching his son's eye and exchanging a smile. By the time the gala was winding down, Maxwell had made a decision. He sought out Robert once more. "I need information on Ms. Collins," he said without preamble. "Background, circumstances, her dance school situation, everything." Robert raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll have a preliminary report for you by morning. Anything specific you're looking for?" Maxwell hesitated. What was he looking for? He wasn't entirely sure himself. "Just the facts, Robert. And be discreet. I don't want her to know I'm asking about her." "Understood, sir." As the last guests began filtering out, Maxwell collected Elijah, who looked happily exhausted. "Ready to head home, buddy?" Elijah nodded, stifling a yawn. "Best night I've had I can't even remember." The simple admission made Maxwell's chest tighten with both joy and regret. How many opportunities for connection had his son missed in these past years? How many had Maxwell failed to facilitate? As they waited for their car to be brought around, Elijah suddenly asked, "Do you think she'd do it again?" "Do what?" "Dance with me." Elijah's voice was soft, vulnerable. I felt alive again, for the first time since the accident. Maxwell placed a hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing gently. "We'll see, Elijah. I can't make promises about what Ms. Collins might be willing to do." "Her name is Amara, Dad." Elijah's correction was gentle but firm. "And she gave me her number. For dance lessons," she said. Maxwell blinked in surprise. "She did?" Elijah nodded, producing a small slip of paper from his jacket pocket. "She said she teaches adaptive dance at a community center on Saturdays. Volunteers, actually." Something warm unfurled in Maxwell's chest. Of course she volunteered to teach dance to those who might otherwise never experience it. Of course she did. Their car arrived, and Maxwell helped transfer Elijah from his wheelchair into the passenger seat, folding the chair with practiced movements before storing it in the trunk. As they pulled away from the hotel, he glanced back and caught a glimpse of Amara exiting through a side door, her uniform exchanged for jeans and a simple sweater. her hair now loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but walked with that same innate grace, even in sneakers. "I think I'd like to try those lessons," Elijah said, interrupting Maxwell's thoughts. "If that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Maxwell replied immediately. "More than okay." Elijah turned to look out the window, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. "Mom would have liked her," he said after a long silence. Maxwell gripped the steering wheel tighter. Catherine had been gone for 3 years, but moments like this still knocked the wind out of him. "Why do you say that?" "Because Amara sees people, really sees them." Elijah's voice was thoughtful. "Mom was like that too." They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. By the time they reached their penthouse apartment, Elijah was dozing against the window, exhausted from more social interaction than he'd had in months. Once his son was settled in bed, Maxwell retreated to his home office with a glass of scotch. He sat in the darkness, staring out at the city lights spread below like a glittering carpet. The evening replayed in his mind. The moment Amara had taken Elijah's hand, the transformation in his son's face, the way they had moved together as if they'd rehearsed for weeks instead of minutes. And then there was the inexplicable pull he'd felt toward her. Maxwell wasn't naive. At 52, he recognized attraction when he felt it. But this felt different, deeper somehow, more significant. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was certainly beautiful. It was something in her spirit, her compassion, her authenticity that called to him. He hadn't felt anything like it since Catherine. The realization sent a jolt of guilt through him. Was he betraying his wife's memory by feeling this way about a woman he'd barely met? A woman young enough to be his daughter, no less? Maxwell drained his scotch, trying to rationalize his feelings as simple gratitude. She had given Elijah something priceless tonight, a reconnection with a part of himself he thought lost forever. Of course, Maxwell felt drawn to her. It was natural, expected even. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. His phone chimed with a message from Robert. "Preliminary information on Ms. Collins. More to follow in the morning." Maxwell hesitated before opening the attachment. This felt invasive, crossing a line. And yet, he needed to know more about the woman who had so effortlessly broken through his son's walls and, if he was being honest, his own as well. The document was brief but thorough, typical of Robert's efficiency. Amara Collins, 27. Born and raised in Riverside District. Mother deceased, cancer, 5 years ago. Father unknown. Graduated with honors from Westlake High School. 2 years at City College, dance program, before dropping out due to financial constraints. Currently works 3 jobs: morning shift at Dawson's Bakery, evening weekend waitstaff at Grand Horizon Hotel, private dance instructor when time permits. Shares small apartment with roommate in Harborview neighborhood. No criminal record. Outstanding student loans approx. $15,000. Applied to National Dance Academy 3 times previously, rejected due to limited openings. Current application pending for fall admission. Maxwell read it twice, each detail painting a clearer picture of a woman working tirelessly toward a dream that kept slipping from her grasp. 3 jobs, and she still made time to volunteer teaching dance to people with disabilities. He thought of the ease with which he could eliminate her financial burdens with a single phone call, the connections he could leverage to ensure her acceptance into the dance academy, the opportunities he could create for her. And yet, something told him Amara Collins would reject such interference, however well-intentioned. The brief interaction they'd had revealed a fierce independence beneath her gentle demeanor. Maxwell closed the file and set his phone aside. Whatever this feeling was, whatever path lay ahead, he needed to proceed carefully, for Elijah's sake, and perhaps for his own as well. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call the community center where Amara volunteered, inquire about their adaptive dance program. For Elijah, of course, The fact that it might bring him into Amara's orbit again was merely incidental. Even in the privacy of his own mind, Maxwell couldn't quite make himself believe that lie. Sunrise found Maxwell already at his desk, nursing his second cup of coffee. Sleep had eluded him, his mind too full of swirling thoughts about the previous evening. He'd finally given up around 5, showered, and retreated to his home office where he could work without disturbing Elijah. The Sunbreak Community Center's website was open on his laptop. The adaptive dance program was listed under Inclusive Arts, with a brief description that mentioned creating movement opportunities for all bodies. No instructor names were provided, but Elijah had confirmed this was where Amara volunteered. Maxwell reached for his phone, then checked the time and set it back down. Even he knew that calling a community center at 6 in the morning wasn't reasonable, no matter how many buildings bore his name across the city. Instead, he pulled up the quarterly reports from his Hong Kong division that had been waiting for his review. He should be focused on the merger negotiations happening next week, the potential acquisition in Singapore, the board meeting where shareholders were expecting answers about the company's aggressive expansion into emerging markets. But after 10 minutes of staring at the same paragraph, Maxwell gave up the pretense. He wasn't thinking about business forecasts or market fluctuations. He was thinking about the way Amara's eyes had lit up when she danced, the gentle authority in her voice when she'd told Elijah that dancing wasn't just about legs, the subtle floral scent that had lingered after she walked away. A knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Mrs. Winters, their housekeeper for the past decade, poked her head in. "You're up early, Mr. Richardson," she observed, setting down a fresh cup of coffee beside him. The one he'd been nursing had gone cold without him noticing. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, grateful for the interruption to his circling thoughts. "Elijah is awake too," she said. "Asked for breakfast in his room. Said something about looking up dance videos online." She paused, her expression curious. "Did something happen at the gala last night?" Maxwell smiled, the first genuine smile he'd directed at anyone other than Elijah in longer than he could remember. "Something good, Mrs. Winters. Something very good." She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. Mrs. Winters had been with them through everything: Catherine's death, Elijah's accident, the dark days that followed. She'd seen the light go out in both Richardson men and had maintained the household with quiet efficiency while they grieved. "Well, it's about time," she said simply, before turning to leave. "Oh, and Dr. Mendez called to confirm Elijah's physical therapy session at 2 this afternoon." Once she'd gone, Maxwell checked the time again. 7:30, still early but not unreasonably so. He picked up his phone and dialed the number listed on the community center's website. "Sunbreak Community Center, this is Darius," a cheerful voice answered. "Good morning. I'm calling about your adaptive dance program," Maxwell began, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd made this kind of call himself rather than having Robert handle it. "Great. Saturday classes are at 10 and 1. We have openings in both sessions right now." The enthusiasm in Darius's voice was genuine. "My son is interested in joining. He's in a wheelchair and—" "Not a problem at all. Our instructor is experienced with all mobility levels. Some participants use wheelchairs, some walkers, some have other movement considerations. Everyone dances their own way." Maxwell felt a knot of tension release. "That sounds perfect. Is the instructor— would that be Amara Collins?" A brief pause. "Yes, Ms. Collins teaches both Saturday sessions. Have you worked with her before?" "In a manner of speaking. She danced with my son at an event last night, and he was very taken with her approach." "That sounds like Amara," Darius chuckled. "She sees possibilities where others see limitations. It's what makes her such a fantastic instructor." By the end of the call, Maxwell had registered Elijah for the 1 o'clock session the following day. He felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he ended the call, emotions he hadn't experienced in decades, not since he was a young man pursuing Catherine. The thought of his late wife sobered him. What would she think of this situation? Of his growing interest in a woman he barely knew? Catherine had always been the romantic one, believing in connections that transcended ordinary explanation. She would probably tell him to follow his heart. But his heart had been safely dormant for 3 years, focused solely on Elijah and the business. Now it was awakening, and the sensation was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. "Dad?" Elijah's voice called from down the hall. "You in your office?" "Coming," Maxwell called back, pushing away from his desk. He found Elijah in his bedroom, laptop open on the adjustable table that swung over his bed. The screen displayed a paused video of wheelchair dancers performing an elaborate routine. "Did you sleep okay?" Maxwell asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Better than I have in ages," Elijah replied, his eyes bright with an energy Maxwell hadn't seen in years. "I've been watching these videos all morning. Look at what they can do." He unpaused the video, and Maxwell watched in amazement as dancers in wheelchairs spun, glided, and performed intricate movements that seemed to defy physics. The joy on their faces was unmistakable. "That's incredible," Maxwell said honestly. "I texted Amara this morning," Elijah continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She says I could learn to do this stuff too, with practice. She sent me all these links to check out." Maxwell tried to hide his surprise. "You texted her already?" "Yeah, I couldn't wait," Elijah admitted, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Was that weird?" "No, not at all," Maxwell assured him, even as he noted the hint of jealousy that flared at the thought of Elijah and Amara texting so casually. The feeling was absurd. Elijah was his son, and his connection with Amara was exactly what Maxwell wanted. "Actually, I just got off the phone with the community center. I signed you up for her class tomorrow at 1, if you're interested." Elijah's face lit up. "Seriously? That's awesome, Dad. I already told her I was going to ask you about it." His expression turned thoughtful. Would you come with me? At least the first time?" The vulnerability in his son's question tugged at Maxwell's heart. For all his renewed enthusiasm, Elijah was still navigating a world that had become frightening and unpredictable since his accident. "Of course I will," Maxwell promised. "I'd like to see what these classes are all about anyway." The relief in Elijah's smile was worth any awkwardness Maxwell might feel at seeing Amara again so soon. "Thanks, Dad. Oh, and Dr. Mendez is coming this afternoon, right?" 2 o'clock, Maxwell confirmed. "Maybe you can tell him about the dance class. I bet he'd be supportive." Elijah nodded, turning back to his laptop. "I'm going to watch a few more videos before he gets here. I want to have some ideas about what I might be able to do." Maxwell left his son engrossed in the wheelchair dance performances, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Whatever else might come of this situation with Amara, seeing Elijah's renewed spark made everything worthwhile. The next day arrived with a mixture of sunshine and scattered clouds, a perfect late spring afternoon. Maxwell helped Elijah into the passenger seat of his more modest weekend car, a BMW SUV that accommodated the wheelchair more easily than his weekday Aston Martin. "Nervous?" Maxwell asked as they pulled away from their building. Elijah nodded, fidgeting with the zipper of his track jacket. "A little. What if I can't do it? What if I make a fool of myself?" "Then you'll try again," Maxwell said simply. "No one gets everything right the first time." "Easy for you to say," Elijah muttered. "You never fail at anything." Maxwell glanced at his son, surprised by the perception. "That's not remotely true, Elijah. I've failed at plenty of things." "Like what?" Elijah challenged. Maxwell thought for a moment. "Like being the father you needed after we lost your mom," he said quietly. "I buried myself in work instead of helping you process your grief. That was a massive failure." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Elijah said, "You were grieving too, Dad, and you had to keep the business running." "The business would have survived if I'd taken more time off," Maxwell admitted. I used it as an escape because I didn't know how to face our new reality. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry for that, Elijah. You deserved better. Elijah reached over and briefly squeezed his father's arm, a small gesture that spoke volumes. We're doing better now, right? Maxwell nodded, his throat suddenly tight. We are. And whatever happens today, whether you're a natural or you struggle, I'm proud of you for trying. The Sunbreak Community Center was housed in a renovated school building in a working-class neighborhood far from the glittering downtown towers where Maxwell typically spent his days. The red brick structure was well-maintained but modest, with a colorful mural spanning one exterior wall depicting diverse community members engaged in various activities. As Maxwell helped Elijah from the car, he noticed several other participants arriving, a teenage girl with forearm crutches, an older man being assisted from a van with a walker, a young boy with leg braces holding his mother's hand. Each moved at their own pace toward the entrance, where a handwritten sign announced Adaptive Dance Studio 3 with an arrow pointing down a hallway. Inside, the center hummed with weekend activity. A basketball game echoed from the gymnasium, an art class was visible through an open door, and the sounds of a children's choir drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. It was a vibrant, unpretentious space that immediately put Maxwell at ease despite being so far removed from his usual environment. They followed the signs to Studio 3, a converted classroom with mirrors along one wall, a worn wooden floor, and a portable sound system in the corner. Several participants were already there, chatting comfortably while stretching or adjusting their mobility devices. And then, Maxwell saw her. Amara stood in the center of the room dressed in simple black leggings and a flowing teal top, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was demonstrating a movement to a young woman in a wheelchair, her hands guiding the woman's arms with gentle precision. When she looked up and saw Elijah, her face broke into a radiant smile. "Elijah, you made it!" She excused herself from the other student and crossed the room to greet them. "I'm so glad you decided to join us." "Wouldn't miss it," Elijah replied, his earlier nervousness seemingly forgotten in her presence. Amara turned to acknowledge Maxwell, her expression warm but more reserved. "Mr. Richardson, I didn't expect to see you here as well." "Maxwell, please," he corrected gently. "And I'm just here for moral support. I'll stay out of the way." She nodded, gesturing to a few chairs along the wall where several other family members sat. "Make yourself comfortable. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes." As she turned back to Elijah and began introducing him to the other participants, Maxwell took a seat, feeling strangely like a parent at a child's school performance. He watched as Amara moved through the room, greeting each person with individualized attention that acknowledged their unique abilities without focusing on their limitations. The class began with gentle warm-ups, adapted for each participant's mobility level. Maxwell was struck by Amara's natural teaching ability, the perfect balance of encouragement and challenge, the way she created an atmosphere where everyone felt safe to try, to sometimes fail, and to try again. Elijah was hesitant at first, his movements tentative, but under Amara's guidance, he gradually gained confidence. When he successfully executed a series of upper body movements synchronized with the turning of his wheelchair, the pride on his face made Maxwell's chest tighten with emotion. "You're a natural, Elijah," Amara called out, and the genuine admiration in her voice was evident to everyone in the room. Watching his son bloom under her attention, Maxwell felt a complex mixture of gratitude, joy, and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. One thing was certain: Amara Collins was becoming increasingly important to the Richardson men, and Maxwell had no idea where this unexpected journey might lead them all. The class ended with a cool-down routine set to gentle piano music, each participant moving in their own way while Amara circulated through the room offering quiet encouragement. When the final notes faded, spontaneous applause broke out among both dancers and observers. "Beautiful work today, everyone," Amara said, her voice carrying easily through the studio. Remember, practice what we learned if you can, but don't push too hard. Dance is about joy, not perfection. As the participants began gathering their belongings, sharing laughs and conversations that spoke of established friendships, Maxwell watched Elijah being approached by the teenage girl with forearm crutches. "First time, right?" she asked, her smile open and friendly. "I'm Zoe." "Elijah," his son replied, seeming pleasantly surprised by the interaction. "And yeah, first class." "You did great," Zoe told him. "Took me like 3 sessions before I could do those turns without totally freaking out." Elijah laughed, a sound that was becoming less rare with each passing hour. "Thanks. I almost rolled over my own foot a couple times." "Happens to the best of us," she assured him. "You coming back next week?" The question was casual but carried a weight that Maxwell recognized immediately. This wasn't just about dance classes, it was about community, about belonging, about a peer seeing Elijah as someone worth knowing. "Definitely," Elijah answered without hesitation. Maxwell felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to find a woman about his age sitting in the chair beside him. "First time for your son?" she asked with the easy familiarity of a veteran parent. "Yes," Maxwell confirmed. "Yours?" She nodded toward Zoe. "My daughter's been coming for almost a year now. Best thing that ever happened to her confidence. I'm Linda, by the way." Maxwell. He deliberately omitted his last name, not wanting to trigger the usual recognition and change in demeanor that typically followed. "Amara is a miracle worker," Linda continued. "Before these classes, Zoe barely left her room. Now she's talking about maybe trying out for the school play next year." Maxwell watched as Zoe and Elijah continued chatting, his son more animated than he'd been with anyone his age since before the accident. "I can already see the difference in Elijah," he admitted, "just from one class. The kids usually go for smoothies at the cafe down the block after class," Linda mentioned casually. "Just so you know, it's become a bit of a tradition." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Are parents invited to this tradition?" Linda laughed. "Strictly forbidden, I'm afraid. Parent-free zone. But there's a decent coffee shop across the street if you need to kill time." The prospect of Elijah socializing independently both thrilled and terrified Maxwell. Since the accident, he'd rarely let his son out of his sight, as if his presence could somehow prevent further harm. But the eager light in Elijah's eyes as he talked with Zoe made it clear that this was a step his son needed to take. Across the room, Amara was speaking with several participants, answering questions and offering additional guidance. Her attention was complete and genuine with each person, never glancing at the clock or showing signs of hurry despite what Maxwell knew was likely a tight schedule between her various jobs. Finally, she made her way to Elijah. "So, what did you think?" she asked, crouching beside his wheelchair to meet his eyes at the same level. "It was amazing," Elijah replied with unrestrained enthusiasm. "I had no idea I could move like that, or that my chair could be part of the dance instead of, just a chair." Amara's smile deepened. "That's exactly it, Elijah. The chair is just another element of your movement vocabulary, like how some dancers use scarves or hoops as extensions of themselves." Zoe chimed in. "We're going for smoothies at Joe's. You should come." Elijah glanced uncertainly at Maxwell, the familiar fear of independence flashing briefly across his face. Before Maxwell could react, Amara said gently, "It's a great group. They get together after almost every class." Then, looking directly at Maxwell, she added, "It's just down the block, very accessible. They usually spend about an hour there." Her gaze held a subtle challenge that Maxwell understood immediately. She was asking him to loosen the protective grip he maintained on his son, to trust not just Elijah, but her judgment as well. "Sounds fun," Maxwell said, focusing on keeping his voice casual for Elijah's benefit. "I can pick you up there in an hour?" The relief and gratitude in Elijah's eyes was worth the anxiety that immediately tightened Maxwell's chest at the thought of his son navigating the world without him. "Thanks, Dad. That would be great." As the group of young people began making their way out, exchanging phone numbers and social media handles, Maxwell found himself standing awkwardly near the studio door, suddenly unsure what to do with his unexpected free hour. "They'll be fine," Amara said, appearing beside him as she gathered her teaching notes. "Joe's is very used to our group. The owner's son was in my very first adaptive dance class 5 years ago." "I'm not worried," Maxwell lied, then caught himself at Amara's knowing look. "Okay, I'm a little worried. It's just, since the accident, you've been his protector," she finished for him. "That's understandable. But part of protection is knowing when to step back and let someone test their own wings." The wisdom in her words struck Maxwell. How many opportunities for independence had he denied Elijah in the name of keeping him safe? "I suppose I could use a coffee," he said finally. "Linda mentioned there's a place across the street?" Amara nodded, gathering the last of her belongings into a worn backpack. "Brumont. Good coffee. Great scones." She hesitated, then added, "I was actually heading there myself. I have a couple hours before my shift at the hotel." Maxwell's heart rate quickened at the casual invitation. "May I join you then? I'd like to talk more about the class, what Elijah might be able to expect going forward." "Of course," she agreed, her tone professional but warm. "That's part of my job as his instructor." As they walked toward the exit, Maxwell found himself acutely aware of the contrast between them. His tailored weekend casual wear, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people's monthly rent, next to her simple dance attire and scuffed sneakers. Yet she moved with a natural grace that made her seem like the more elegant of the two. Outside, the spring afternoon had warmed considerably, sunshine breaking through the earlier clouds. They crossed the street to Brumont, a cozy independent coffee shop with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The barista greeted Amara by name, already starting what was clearly her usual order. "Hey, Ms. Collins, the usual?" "Thanks, Danny. And whatever this gentleman would like," Amara replied, gesturing to Maxwell. He started to protest, the instinct to pay deeply ingrained, but something in Amara's expression stopped him. Pride, perhaps. Independence. Instead, he simply ordered a black coffee and thanked her. They settled at a small table near the window where they could see the smoothie shop across the street. Maxwell noticed how Amara positioned herself to keep an eye on the entrance, clearly taking her responsibility to his son seriously even during her break. "You're very good at what you do," Maxwell said after they'd received their drinks. "Teaching, I mean. I've never seen Elijah respond so quickly to anyone." Amara wrapped her hands around her mug, a large chai tea latte he'd noticed. "Thank you. I love teaching almost as much as performing. Maybe more some days." "How did you get started with adaptive dance?" A shadow crossed her face briefly. "My mother had MS. In her final years, she lost a lot of mobility. I was taking dance classes then, and I'd come home and show her what I'd learned, adapting the movements so she could do them from her bed or wheelchair." She took a sip of her tea. "After she passed, I wanted to keep sharing that with others who might not otherwise experience dance." Maxwell felt a deepening respect bloom alongside his growing attraction. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you." She offered a small smile. "It was 5 years ago now. The anniversary was actually last week." "That must be difficult." "It is. But teaching helps. Especially when I see someone like Elijah discover what their body can still do, despite what it can't." She leaned forward slightly. "He has a natural sense of rhythm and excellent upper body control. With practice, he could become quite accomplished." Maxwell found himself captivated by her passion, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about dance and teaching. "He hasn't been this excited about anything since before the accident," he admitted. "His mother was a dancer, did he mention that?" Amara's expression softened. "He did, yes. He said she used to dance with him in your kitchen." The memory ached, but not as sharply as it once had. "Catherine would have loved what you did with him at the gala. And today, She always believed in the healing power of movement. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Maxwell stared into his coffee. We lost her in the same accident that put Elijah in the wheelchair. Amara reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture so unexpected and gentle that Maxwell felt it like an electric current. I know. Elijah told me a little bit. I'm so sorry, Maxwell. Hearing his first name on her lips for the first time sent another jolt through him. Thank you, he managed, finding himself momentarily at a loss for words, a rare occurrence for a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. She withdrew her hand, wrapping it once more around her mug. He also mentioned that you haven't had much time for anything but work since then. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. Did he now? Seems my son has been quite forthcoming with you. People often share personal things with their dance teachers, Amara said with a small smile. Something about movement opens up other kinds of barriers too. And what did you think of his assessment? Maxwell found himself genuinely curious about how she perceived him. Amara considered him thoughtfully. I think grief takes different forms for different people. Some withdraw, some throw themselves into work or other distractions. There's no right way to handle loss. She paused. But I also think that at some point, we have to start living again, not just existing. The gentle challenge in her words resonated uncomfortably. Had he merely been existing these past 3 years, focusing on work and Elijah's physical needs while neglecting the emotional landscape for both of them? I'm trying, he said simply. This past week has been illuminating. Because of Elijah's progress? That, yes. But also, Maxwell hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I've realized how narrow our world has become, mine and Elijah's, how much we've both been missing. Amara nodded, understanding in her eyes. The first step is the hardest. But look at him now. She nodded toward the window. Maxwell turned to see Elijah laughing with his new friends through the smoothie shop window, his expression carefree in a way it hadn't been in years. The sight filled his heart with equal parts joy and regret for how long he'd allowed his son to remain isolated. I have tickets, he said suddenly, surprising himself, to the symphony this Friday. A fundraiser performance for arts education. I'm on the board, so I'm expected to attend, but... He took a breath, steadying himself. Would you like to join me? As a thank you for what you've done for Elijah. Amara's eyes widened slightly, clearly caught off guard. That's very kind, but it's not a date, Maxwell clarified quickly, though part of him wished it could be. Just a gesture of appreciation, and I thought you might enjoy the music, being a dancer. She seemed to deliberate, conflict evident in her expression. I do love the symphony, she admitted, but I'm scheduled to work at the hotel Friday night. I understand, Maxwell said, ignoring the disappointment that settled in his chest. It was just a thought. Thank you for the invitation, though, she added, her tone sincere. It was thoughtful. An awkward silence fell between them, and Maxwell mentally kicked himself for overstepping. Of course she wouldn't want to attend a formal event with him. The age gap alone made it inappropriate, not to mention the power imbalance between them. But then Amara surprised him. I'm free Saturday evening, though, she said carefully. If you'd like to continue this conversation about Elijah's progress somewhere other than a coffee shop. Maxwell's pulse quickened. I would like that very much. Nothing fancy, she stipulated with a small smile. And definitely not a date. Just 2 people discussing a mutual interest, Elijah's development through dance. Agreed, Maxwell said, though he couldn't quite suppress the hope that blossomed despite her clear boundaries. I know a place that serves excellent food without any pretension. Would 7 work for you? 7 would be perfect. She glanced at her watch and began gathering her things. I should start heading to the hotel. My shift starts at 4. Of course. Thank you for the coffee and the conversation. As they both stood, Maxwell was acutely aware of how much he didn't want this interaction to end. There was something so refreshing about Amara's straightforward manner, her lack of artifice or agenda. "Saturday at 7, then," she confirmed, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "I'll text you my address." "I look forward to it." As he watched her walk away, Maxwell felt like a teenager again, nervous, excited, filled with possibilities. Whatever this was between them, friendship, mentorship for Elijah, or something with the potential to be more, he knew with certainty that Amara Collins had already changed their lives for the better. And for the first time in 3 years, Maxwell Richardson found himself looking forward to the future rather than dreading it. Saturday evening found Maxwell uncharacteristically nervous as he stood before his closet, deliberating over his wardrobe with an intensity usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. Amara had been clear, nothing fancy, definitely not a date, yet he found himself changing shirts 3 times before settling on a simple blue button-down and dark jeans. No tie, no designer logos, nothing that screamed wealth or status. "Dad?" Elijah called from the hallway. "Can I come in?" "Of course," Maxwell replied, buttoning his cuffs as his son wheeled into the bedroom. Elijah surveyed his father's appearance with undisguised interest. "You look different." "Different good or different bad?" Maxwell asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Different good," Elijah assured him. "Less CEO, more actual human being." He grinned. "So, where are you taking Amara?" "Rosemary's," Maxwell answered, naming a neighborhood bistro known for excellent food rather than exclusivity or price point. "And it's not a date. We're just discussing your progress with the dance program." Elijah's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Right. That's why you've tried on half your wardrobe and have been checking your phone every 30 seconds. Maxwell felt a flush creep up his neck. When had his son become so perceptive? Or had Elijah always been this observant, and Maxwell had simply been too preoccupied to notice? "It's complicated," he admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Amara is your dance instructor. She's also considerably younger than me, and I haven't exactly socialized much since we lost your mom." Elijah's expression softened. "Dad, it's okay to like her. Mom would want you to be happy." The simple statement hit Maxwell with unexpected force. "You think so?" "I know so," Elijah said firmly. "Remember what she always used to say? Life is for the living, so live it fully." Maxwell did remember. Catherine had approached life with a voracious enthusiasm that had been one of the things he'd loved most about her. The thought that she might approve of his interest in Amara lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "When did you get so wise?" he asked his son. Elijah shrugged. "Probably somewhere between physical therapy sessions 3 and 400. His smile turned mischievous. "For what it's worth, I think Amara likes you too." "Oh? And what makes you the expert?" "She asks about you," Elijah revealed. "In our texts. Nothing obvious, but she'll slip in questions about what you're like as a dad, what you enjoy outside of work. Stuff like that." Maxwell tried not to let this information affect him too deeply, but his heart betrayed him with a quickened pace. "Well, don't read too much into it. She's naturally caring. It's what makes her a good teacher." "Keep telling yourself that," Elijah teased. "Anyway, I'm hanging out with Zoe and Marcus tonight. We're doing a movie marathon at Marcus's place. His mom's picking me up in an hour." Maxwell paused in the act of checking his wallet. "You are? When did this get arranged?" "This afternoon. We have a group chat going now." Elijah's casual tone belied the significance of this development, a social life independent of his father's orchestration. "His house is fully accessible. His dad uses a wheelchair too." "That's great," Maxwell managed, genuinely pleased despite the suddenness of the plan. "Do you need me to pick you up later?" "Nope. Mrs. Chen says she can drop me off on their way home. Around 11, if that's okay?" Maxwell nodded, marveling at how quickly things were changing. Just a week ago, Elijah had barely left the apartment except for medical appointments and occasional outings with Maxwell. Now he had friends, group chats, social plans. "More than okay," he assured his son. "Have fun, and text me if you need anything." After Elijah left to get ready for his own evening out, Maxwell checked the address Amara had texted him. Her apartment was in Harborview, a working-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. He'd been right to dress down. Arriving in anything too ostentatious would have made him stick out like a sore thumb. The drive to Amara's neighborhood gave Maxwell time to collect his thoughts. What did he want from this evening? From Amara herself? He couldn't deny his attraction to her, but there were practical considerations that couldn't be ignored. The age gap, her role as Elijah's teacher, the vastly different worlds they inhabited. Yet none of those practical concerns seemed to dampen the anticipation he felt as he navigated to her address. Amara's apartment building was a red brick walk-up, well-maintained but clearly aging. Maxwell parked his BMW, the most understated vehicle in his collection, and approached the entrance. Her name was neatly printed beside the buzzer for apartment 3B. He pressed the button, and moments later, her voice came through the intercom. "Hello? It's Maxwell. I'll be right down." True to her word, Amara appeared a few minutes later. She wore a simple sundress in a deep teal that complemented her skin tone perfectly, with a light cardigan against the evening chill. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, revealing natural waves that the tight bun at the hotel had concealed. Without the context of the hotel uniform or dance attire, Maxwell was struck anew by her beauty, not the manufactured perfection that dominated the social circles he typically moved in, but something more authentic and alive. "Hi," she said, smiling as she approached. "Right on time." "You look lovely," Maxwell replied honestly. "Thank you." She glanced at his car and raised an eyebrow. "This is more understated than I expected." Maxwell chuckled. "I do own vehicles that aren't designed to signal wealth and status, just not many of them." "Well, I appreciate the effort." Her smile turned playful. "I would have felt ridiculous climbing into a Bentley in this neighborhood. People would think I'd called a car service." The easy banter continued as they drove to Rosemary's, discussing the unseasonably pleasant weather and the charming blocks they passed through. Maxwell was grateful for the comfortable atmosphere, so different from the stilted conversations that typically characterized his rare attempts at socializing outside of business contexts. Rosemary's was busy but not overcrowded when they arrived. The hostess led them to a corner table beneath a window draped with fairy lights. The restaurant struck the perfect balance Maxwell had hoped for: quality food and service without pretension or excessive formality. "This is lovely," Amara commented as they settled in. "I've heard of this place but never been." "They make an incredible risotto," Maxwell told her, "and the wine list is carefully curated without being overpriced." Once they had ordered, the risotto for Amara, roasted salmon for Maxwell, and a bottle of Pinot Noir to share, the conversation turned naturally to Elijah. "He's made remarkable progress just this week," Amara said, her expression animated. "The way he's embraced the movement vocabulary we're developing is really impressive. Some students take months to become that comfortable." "He's always been a quick study," Maxwell replied with paternal pride. Before the accident, he was on track for collegiate swimming. His coaches said he had natural kinesthetic intelligence. That makes sense. It's still there, just channeled differently now. Amara took a sip of her wine. "And he's connecting well with the other students. Zoe mentioned they're having a movie night?" Maxwell nodded. "Tonight, actually. He's there now. It's the first social outing he's initiated since before." Something in his tone must have revealed his complex feelings about this development, because Amara's gaze softened with understanding. "It's hard to let go, isn't it? Even when it's exactly what they need." "Terrifying," Maxwell admitted. "Logically, I know it's healthy, but part of me still sees him as so vulnerable." "He is vulnerable," Amara acknowledged, "but he's also resilient. more than either of you may realize yet." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. After the waiter departed, Maxwell found himself asking, "How did you become so wise about these things? You're what, 27? Yet you speak with the insight of someone who's lived much longer." Amara's expression turned reflective. When you grow up watching someone you love lose physical abilities one by one, you learn a lot about adaptation, about finding new ways to experience joy. My mother taught me that. "Tell me more about her," Maxwell requested gently. "She was a force of nature." Amara smiled at the memory. "Elementary school teacher for 30 years. Diagnosed with MS when I was 10, but she'd probably had it longer. By the time I was in high school, she was using a wheelchair most days. But she never stopped living, never stopped dancing either, even if it was just with her hands or her expressions. She sounds remarkable." "She was." Amara twirled pasta on her fork. "She's the one who encouraged me to apply to dance schools, even when we both knew we couldn't afford them. 'Dream anyway,' she'd say. 'Dreams have a way of finding paths we can't see yet.'" "Wise words," Maxwell murmured, struck by the similarity to Catherine's philosophy. "What about Elijah's mother?" Amara asked. "He speaks of her with such love." Maxwell felt the familiar pang, but it was gentler now, more bittersweet than raw. Catherine was incandescent. She approached everything with passion: dancing, motherhood, her work with children's arts programs. She had this ability to make everyone around her feel special, seen. That's a rare gift. It was. Maxwell took a sip of wine. "Meeting her changed the trajectory of my life. I was headed for a career in corporate law, following in my father's footsteps. She convinced me to pursue business instead, to build something rather than just negotiate the deals for others." "Hence Richardson Enterprises?" Maxwell nodded. "Started with one small tech company I believed in. Grew from there." He paused, studying her. "Does that bother you? The wealth, I mean?" Amara considered the question carefully. Not the wealth itself, more the inequities it often represents. She met his gaze directly. "I teach children who have no access to specialized medical care because they can't afford it. I've watched talented dancers give up their dreams because of financial barriers I couldn't even imagine facing with your resources." The gentle challenge in her words resonated with Maxwell. Through his foundation, he funded many charitable causes, but he'd never examined the systemic issues she was referencing. "That's a perspective I need to consider more deeply," he acknowledged. Amara smiled, visibly relaxing. "Most people in your position would have either dismissed me as naive or launched into a defense of capitalism." "I'm not most people," Maxwell replied simply. "No," she agreed, her eyes holding his. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Maxwell found himself wanting to reach across the table and take her hand, to see if the electricity he'd felt when she touched him at the coffee shop had been real or imagined. Before he could act on the impulse, Amara broke the tension. "So tell me about this symphony fundraiser I couldn't attend. What was it supporting?" The remainder of dinner passed in comfortable conversation about arts education, the dance academy Amara hoped to attend, and Maxwell's experiences on various non-profit boards. By the time they finished their dessert, a shared crème brûlée that Amara had declared too delicious not to try, Maxwell felt more at ease than he had in years. As they walked back to his car in the gentle spring evening, Amara surprised him by asking, "Would you like to see where I actually dance? Not teaching, but for myself?" Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Now?" She nodded. "There's a studio space about 10 minutes from here. A friend lets me use it after hours sometimes. I have a key." She hesitated. "I don't share this with many people, but I'm working on my audition piece for the National Dance Academy. I could use an objective eye." The invitation felt significant, a window into a private part of herself that Maxwell sensed she guarded carefully. "I'd be honored," he said simply. The studio turned out to be a small converted storefront with mirrors along one wall and a worn wooden floor that had seen years of use. Amara flipped on the lights and moved to a small speaker system in the corner. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, gesturing to a couple of folding chairs against the wall. "This piece is still in development, so be kind, but honest." As Maxwell settled into one of the chairs, Amara slipped off her cardigan and shoes, standing barefoot in the center of the room. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, then pressed play on the speaker. The music that filled the space was haunting, a solo cello joined gradually by other strings, building a melody that seemed to speak of longing and resilience. When Amara began to move, Maxwell found himself holding his breath. This was different from the dance she'd shared with Elijah at the gala, or the careful instruction she provided at the community center. This was raw, personal, a physical manifestation of something deep within her. Her movements alternated between fluid grace and sharp, almost desperate gestures, her face expressing emotions too complex for words. Maxwell understood in that moment that he was witnessing something precious, not just exceptional talent, but a glimpse into Amara's soul. As the dance built to its climax, he felt an overwhelming certainty that this woman was meant for greater stages than hotel ballrooms and community centers, no matter how meaningful her work there might be. When the music finally faded and Amara stood still, slightly breathless, Maxwell found himself at a loss for words. "Well?" she prompted, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Too melodramatic? Not technical enough?" "It's perfect," he said honestly. "Absolutely perfect." The silence that followed Maxwell's words was charged with unspoken emotion. Amara's eyes widened slightly, as if his unfiltered admiration had caught her off guard. "Perfect is a strong word," she finally said, reaching for a small towel to dab at her forehead. "The transition in the middle section still feels awkward to me, and I'm not sure about the ending." "Then the judges will be overwhelmed by what you consider imperfect," Maxwell replied, still moved by what he had witnessed. "That wasn't just dance, Amara. That was truth in motion." She looked away, but not before he caught the flush that colored her cheeks. "Thank you. That means a lot." As she gathered her things, Maxwell found himself reluctant for the evening to end. In just a few hours, Amara had drawn him further out of his carefully constructed shell than anyone had in years. Being with her felt simultaneously comfortable and exhilarating, a combination he hadn't experienced since his early days with Catherine. "It's still relatively early," he ventured. "Would you like to get coffee somewhere? Or a nightcap?" Amara glanced at her watch, hesitation evident in her expression. "I should probably get home. I have an early shift at the bakery tomorrow." "Of course," Maxwell said, masking his disappointment. "Let me drive you home." The drive back to her apartment was quieter than their earlier journey, but not uncomfortably so. Maxwell found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way her fingers occasionally tapped against her knee in rhythm to some internal music. When they arrived at her building, he put the car in park and turned to face her. "Thank you for sharing your dance with me tonight, and for everything you've done for Elijah. I don't think I can adequately express what it's meant to both of us." Amara smiled, the streetlight casting a warm glow across her features. "Elijah is special, not because of his circumstances, but because of who he is." She paused, then added softly, "Like his father." The compliment warmed Maxwell more than it probably should have. "May I see you again? Outside of Elijah's dance classes, I mean." She seemed to weigh her response carefully. "I'd like that. But Maxwell, I think we should be clear about something." "What's that?" "Our worlds are very different," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "You're one of the wealthiest men in the city. I'm working 3 jobs to make rent and chase a dream that might never materialize." "That doesn't matter to me," Maxwell insisted. "It might not matter to you," Amara acknowledged, "but it matters. Money, status, privilege, these things shape our perspectives, our options, our lives in ways we don't always recognize. Maxwell wanted to protest, to assure her that these differences were inconsequential compared to the connection he felt growing between them. But he recognized the wisdom in her caution. "Then let's move slowly," he suggested. "Get to know each other better. No assumptions, no expectations." Amara considered this, then nodded. "I'd like that." She opened her door but paused before stepping out. "For what it's worth, I enjoyed tonight. Very much." "As did I," Maxwell replied, feeling a disproportionate sense of triumph at this modest admission. "Good night, Maxwell." With a final smile, she closed the car door and walked toward her building. At the entrance, she turned and offered a small wave before disappearing inside. Maxwell sat for a moment, replaying the evening in his mind. She hadn't said no to seeing him again. That felt like progress, however tentative. His phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "Movie night awesome. Heading home soon. How was dinner with Amara?" Maxwell smiled at his son's transparent curiosity. "Good. Very good. See you at home," he typed back. Driving through the nighttime streets, Maxwell found himself feeling lighter than he had in years. Even Amara's gentle warnings about their different worlds couldn't dampen the sense that something important had begun, not just between him and Amara, but in his life more broadly. A thawing, a reawakening. When he arrived home, the penthouse was still empty. He kicked off his shoes and poured himself a small scotch, carrying it to the wall of windows that showcased the city's glittering skyline. From this height, the world below looked like a perfect miniature, orderly, contained, predictable. But his life no longer felt that way. In just 1 week, everything had shifted. Elijah was emerging from his shell, forming friendships, embracing new possibilities. And Maxwell himself was contemplating something he'd thought permanently closed to him, the possibility of connection, of affection, perhaps even eventually of love. The sound of the front door opening announced Elijah's return. His son wheeled into the living room, his face animated with the afterglow of social enjoyment. "Hey, Dad, how was your not a date?" Maxwell smiled, taking a seat on the sofa where he could be at eye level with Elijah. "It was illuminating. Amara is an extraordinary person." "Told you," Elijah said with satisfaction. "So, did you kiss her?" "Elijah!" Maxwell sputtered, nearly choking on his scotch. "That would be entirely inappropriate." "Why? You're both adults." "Because it's complicated," Maxwell explained, setting his glass aside. "She's your instructor. She's considerably younger than me, and we're just getting to know each other." Elijah rolled his eyes. "Dad, I'm 19, not 9. I get that adult relationships are nuanced. I'm just saying I'd be cool with it, if something did develop between you two." The easy acceptance in his son's voice touched Maxwell deeply. "Thank you. That means a lot." He changed the subject. "How was your movie night?" Elijah launched into an enthusiastic recap of the evening, the films they'd watched, the ongoing debate about which superhero universe was superior, the plans they were already making for future get-togethers. Maxwell listened, basking in his son's renewed engagement with life. "Oh, and Zoe asked if we could do a dance demonstration at her school's assembly next month," Elijah mentioned casually. "For Disability Awareness Week. Amara said she'd choreograph something for us if we want to participate." Maxwell raised his eyebrows, surprised but pleased. "That's a big step. How do you feel about it?" Elijah considered the question seriously. Nervous, but also proud? Like, for the first time since the accident, I have something to show people instead of something to hide. The simple statement struck Maxwell profoundly. How long had his son been feeling this way, that his disability was something shameful, something to conceal? And how had he, as Elijah's father, missed it? "You've never had anything to hide," Maxwell said firmly. "But I understand what you mean about having something to share. I think the demonstration is a wonderful idea, if you're comfortable with it." I think I am, Elijah decided. Amara says visibility matters, that people need to see different kinds of bodies making art, being present in the world. Another glimpse of Amara's wisdom, Maxwell thought. She understood things about Elijah's experience that he, despite his love and proximity, had missed entirely. The next morning, Maxwell woke earlier than usual, his mind still full of Amara, her dance, her cautious openness, the way her eyes had held his in moments of genuine connection. Before he could overthink it, he sent her a text. "Thank you again for a wonderful evening. I'd like to see your audition piece when it's finished, if you're willing to share it." He set his phone aside and went about his morning routine, trying not to check for a response every few minutes. By the time he was on his second cup of coffee, a reply came through. "I'd like that. Maybe after next Saturday's class? Still needs work, but feedback helps." Maxwell smiled at the phone, probably looking every bit the lovesick teenager Elijah had accused him of becoming. He typed back, "Saturday it is. Enjoy your morning at the bakery." A few minutes later, his phone buzzed again with a photo, a perfectly formed cinnamon roll with the caption, "Perks of the job, worth the 4 a.m. wake-up, sometimes." The casual sharing of her morning made Maxwell's heart swell unexpectedly. This was normal, he realized. Ordinary. The kind of everyday exchange he hadn't experienced with anyone outside of Elijah in years. Later that day, after Elijah had left for a physical therapy session, Maxwell found himself at his desk, reviewing the report Robert had provided about Amara's financial situation. The student loans, the multiple jobs, the dream of dance school that remained financially out of reach despite her obvious talent. He could solve these problems for her with a single phone call. A scholarship fund established in Catherine's name at the National Dance Academy. A word to the right people on the admissions committee. It would be so easy. And yet he knew instinctively that such interference would be a violation of the fragile trust growing between them. Amara valued her independence, her self-sufficiency. She might accept help for others, her students, causes she believed in, but not for herself. Still, the thought of her extraordinary talent potentially going unrealized because of financial barriers felt fundamentally wrong to Maxwell. There had to be a way to support her dreams without undermining her dignity or independence. A notification on his computer reminded him of the upcoming board meeting for the Arts Foundation he had established after Catherine's death. The foundation primarily funded youth arts programs in underserved communities, but its mission was broadly defined. An idea began to form in Maxwell's mind. What if the foundation created a fellowship program for working artists? Not scholarships for students, but support for practicing artists who, like Amara, were struggling to advance their careers while maintaining financial stability. The program could include mentorship, financial support, performance opportunities. Maxwell began typing notes, excitement building as the concept took shape. This wouldn't just benefit Amara, though he had to admit she was his inspiration. It could create opportunities for dozens of artists in similar circumstances. He was so engrossed in developing the idea that he almost missed the incoming call from Robert. "Sir, I thought you should know," his assistant said without preamble. "Ms. Rachel Hargrove has been making inquiries about your recent activities." Maxwell frowned. Rachel was a longtime board member of Richardson Enterprises and the widow of one of his father's closest friends. She was also, unfortunately, someone who had made her romantic interest in Maxwell increasingly clear since Catherine's death. "What kind of inquiries?" "About your attendance at the community center, sir, and your dinner companion last night." A chill ran down Maxwell's spine. The last thing he wanted was for Amara to become the subject of society gossip or corporate intrigue. How did she even know about that? "I'm not sure, sir, but Ms. Hargrove has connections throughout the city, and she's been persistent in her interest in your personal life." Maxwell pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache forming. Rachel was not someone to be underestimated. She moved in the highest social circles, and had a reputation for using information strategically to get what she wanted. "Thank you for the heads up, Robert. Let me know if you hear anything else." After ending the call, Maxwell stared out the window, troubled by this development. His growing connection with Amara felt tender, private, something to be protected from the harsh scrutiny of his usual world. But if Rachel was already aware of their dinner, it was only a matter of time before others in his social and business circles took notice as well. The collision of his world with Amara's had begun, and Maxwell wasn't sure either of them was ready for the complications that might follow. The week passed in a blur of activity. Maxwell found himself checking his phone more frequently than he cared to admit, each message from Amara, whether about Elijah's progress or simply sharing a moment from her day, bringing a rush of pleasure that seemed disproportionate to the actual exchange. Elijah, meanwhile, was flourishing. He'd begun practicing dance movements daily in their home gym, using the techniques Amara had taught him. His physical therapist had noticed the difference immediately, commenting on his improved upper body strength and range of motion. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up," Dr. Mendez had said during Thursday's session. "I haven't seen this kind of progress in months." By Saturday morning, Maxwell found himself looking forward to the dance class with an eagerness that had little to do with Elijah's development and everything to do with seeing Amara again. They'd maintained a steady stream of text messages throughout the week, and each exchange revealed new facets of her that only deepened his admiration. He learned that she read voraciously, particularly biographies of dancers and artists, that she could bake French pastries with professional precision, that she volunteered not only at the community center but also at a nursing home once a month, leading seated dance sessions for the residents. In return, he'd shared more of himself than he had with anyone in years. Stories about Elijah as a child, memories of Catherine that he'd kept locked away, even frustrations about his business, the constant pressure, the politics, the compromises required to maintain an empire. Through it all, Amara had responded with genuine interest and insight, neither impressed by his status nor judgmental of his privilege. She simply accepted him as he was, while occasionally challenging him to consider perspectives outside his experience. "Ready, Dad?" Elijah called from the hallway, interrupting Maxwell's thoughts. "Coming," he replied, grabbing his keys and wallet. When they arrived at the community center, the atmosphere was charged with energy. Zoe greeted Elijah immediately, wheeling her chair alongside his as they entered Studio 3. "Amara's been working on our routine for the school demonstration," she told him excitedly. "Wait till you see what she has planned." Maxwell hung back, taking his usual seat along the wall as more participants filtered in. Amara hadn't yet arrived, but several students were already warming up, showing a discipline and enthusiasm that spoke to her influence. The studio door opened, and Maxwell looked up expectantly, only to freeze in shock. It wasn't Amara who entered, but Rachel Hargrove. Rachel was striking in her carefully cultivated way, tall, slim, impeccably dressed in what most would consider casual attire but which Maxwell recognized as designer leisure wear worth thousands. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant bob, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. At 50, she was closer to Maxwell's age than Amara, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her calculating gaze swept the room, landing on Maxwell with predatory precision. "Maxwell, what a delightful surprise!" she exclaimed, though her presence made it clear the encounter was anything but accidental. Maxwell rose from his chair, maintaining a polite but reserved expression. "Rachel, I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I've recently joined the community center's board of directors," she explained, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Part of my charitable outreach. I thought I'd visit some of the programs we support." She turned toward Elijah. "And this must be your son. How lovely to finally meet you, Elijah." Elijah, who had turned at the sound of her voice, nodded cautiously. He'd never met Rachel, but Maxwell had mentioned her occasionally in the context of business matters. "Nice to meet you," he responded, his tone neutral. Before Rachel could continue, the door opened again, and Amara entered, carrying a portable speaker and a notebook. She paused momentarily upon seeing Rachel, her expression carefully controlled. "Good morning, everyone," Amara called to the class, setting down her equipment. "Let's get started with our warm-ups in a few minutes." She approached Rachel with professional courtesy. "Can I help you? I'm Amara Collins, the instructor." Rachel assessed Amara with a swift, evaluating glance that missed nothing, from her simple dance attire to her natural beauty. "Rachel Hargrove," she replied, extending a manicured hand. "Board of Directors. I'm just observing today." "Of course," Amara said smoothly. "We welcome observers. There are chairs along the wall if you'd like to sit." As Amara turned to begin the class, Rachel made her way to the empty chair beside Maxwell, crossing her legs elegantly as she settled in. "So, this is where you've been spending your Saturday afternoons," she murmured, her voice low enough that only Maxwell could hear. "I must say, I was curious what could possibly draw you to a community center in this neighborhood." Maxwell kept his eyes on Elijah, who was now engaged in warm-up exercises. "My son's participation in this program is hardly a secret, Rachel." "No, but your interest in the instructor might be worth keeping more discreet," she replied, her tone deceptively light. "She's quite young, isn't she? And very pretty in that natural, untamed way." Maxwell turned to face her directly, his expression hardening. "Why are you really here, Rachel?" She smiled, unfazed by his directness. "Concern for an old friend. You've been through so much, Maxwell. I'd hate to see you taken advantage of." "Amara is Elijah's dance instructor," Maxwell stated firmly. "Any other speculation is inappropriate and unwelcome." Rachel raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Is that why you took her to dinner last Saturday? For a parent-teacher conference?" The fact that she knew this specific detail confirmed Robert's warning that Rachel had been gathering information. Maxwell felt a surge of protective anger, not for himself, but for Amara, who had done nothing to deserve this kind of scrutiny. "My personal life is not open for discussion," he said, his voice low but steely. "Not even with old friends." Before Rachel could respond, Amara called the class to order, beginning the session with the same blend of enthusiasm and careful instruction that Maxwell had come to admire. He noted with satisfaction that she gave no indication of being disturbed by Rachel's presence, maintaining her focus entirely on her students. Throughout the class, Rachel observed with calculating interest, occasionally making notes on her phone. Maxwell could almost see her mind working, assessing Amara as a potential threat or opportunity in whatever game she thought she was playing. When the class moved to partner work, preparing for the school demonstration, Amara paired Elijah with Zoe. The two teenagers worked together seamlessly, Elijah executing a series of synchronized movements with his wheelchair that complemented Zoe's dance with her forearm crutches. "They're quite good," Rachel commented, seeming genuinely surprised. "Your son has talent." "Yes, he does," Maxwell agreed, momentarily disarmed by her apparent sincerity. "The instructor clearly knows what she's doing," Rachel continued. "Has she been teaching long?" Maxwell hesitated, wary of feeding Rachel's curiosity but seeing no harm in basic information. "Several years, I believe. She also performs professionally when opportunities arise." "Interesting." Rachel's gaze lingered on Amara. "The dance world is notoriously difficult to break into, especially for someone without connections or financial backing." The comment, with its subtle emphasis on Amara's lack of resources, ignited Maxwell's irritation anew. "Some people succeed on merit alone, Rachel. Talent has a way of demanding recognition." Rachel smiled thinly. Such faith in meritocracy. How refreshing. She checked her watch. "Well, I should be going. Board meeting at the Prescott Foundation at noon." She stood, smoothing her expensive athleisure wear. "Do give my regards to the instructor. She's quite captivating." The word held a subtle warning that wasn't lost on Maxwell. As Rachel made her exit, nodding politely to Amara on her way out, he felt a growing unease. Rachel Hargrove didn't make social calls without purpose, and her interest in his connection with Amara could only spell trouble. When the class ended, the students gathered around Amara to discuss the upcoming school demonstration. Maxwell watched as she explained the concept, a performance that would showcase different adaptive dance styles, highlighting the artistry and athleticism possible with various mobility considerations. Elijah and Zoe will perform a duet that incorporates both wheelchair and crutch choreography, Amara explained, her excitement evident. Marcus and Jamal will demonstrate partnered movement between standing and seated dancers, and will close with a group piece that brings everyone together. The students' enthusiasm was palpable, none more so than Elijah's. Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son so invested in a project, so eager to share his abilities with others. As the group dispersed, Amara approached Maxwell, her expression questioning. "Friend of yours?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the door where Rachel had exited. "Business associate," Maxwell clarified, "and board member here, apparently." "She seemed very interested in our class," Amara observed neutrally, though Maxwell detected a hint of unease beneath her composed exterior. "Rachel is interested in anything she perceives as valuable to her," Maxwell said carefully. "I wouldn't read too much into it." Amara nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "Elijah did exceptionally well today," she said, changing the subject. "His control and timing have improved dramatically just in the past week." "He's been practicing at home," Maxwell told her, pride evident in his voice. "I think the school demonstration has given him a goal to work toward." "It's important," Amara agreed. "Having something to share with others, a way to express yourself that transcends limitations." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as Elijah chatted animatedly with Zoe and Marcus about their performance plans. "About this evening," Maxwell began, referring to their arrangement to review her audition piece after class. "I was thinking we could get dinner afterward if you're free." Amara hesitated, glancing around the now emptying studio. "I'd like that, but perhaps somewhere less public than last time?" Maxwell understood immediately. Rachel's appearance had unsettled her more than she was admitting. "I could cook," he offered impulsively. "At my place. Elijah's going to a gaming night with Marcus after smoothies." The suggestion surprised them both. Maxwell hadn't extended a personal invitation to his home to anyone outside of business associates in years. And for Amara, entering his private space represented a significant step in their cautiously evolving relationship. "You cook?" she asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "I do, actually," Maxwell replied, feeling oddly defensive. "Catherine insisted I learn the basics, said no one should be helpless in their own kitchen, regardless of how many staff they could hire." Amara's smile widened. "She sounds wiser by the day." She considered the invitation. "Okay, your place. But simple food, no showing off with expensive ingredients just to impress me." "Deal," Maxwell agreed, feeling unreasonably pleased. "Though I make no promises about the quality of my wine cellar, some habits are hard to break." As they made plans for the evening, Maxwell deliberately pushed thoughts of Rachel Hargrove to the back of his mind. Whatever her agenda, he wouldn't allow it to cast a shadow over the unexpected brightness Amara had brought into his and Elijah's lives. But a lifetime in business had taught Maxwell to recognize a potential threat when he saw one. And Rachel, with her calculating eyes and strategic mind, was most definitely a threat, not just to his growing feelings for Amara, but potentially to Amara herself. After the dance class, Maxwell and Elijah joined the other students for the now traditional smoothie outing. Maxwell found himself drawn into conversation with other parents, particularly Linda, Zoe's mother, who had appointed herself unofficial welcome committee for new families. "So Rachel Hargrove is on the center's board now," Linda remarked, stirring her smoothie thoughtfully. "That's interesting." You know her? Maxwell asked, surprised. Of her, Linda clarified. My husband's firm handles legal work for some of the charitable foundations in the city. Rachel has a reputation for being very strategic about which causes she supports. The diplomatic phrasing didn't mask Linda's skepticism. Meaning? Meaning she typically aligns herself with organizations that provide maximum social capital or networking opportunities. Linda shrugged. The community center doesn't exactly fit her usual profile. It's a bit grassroots for her taste. Maxwell absorbed this information, his unease about Rachel's appearance deepening. How long has she been on the board? That's the thing, Linda replied, lowering her voice. As far as I know, she wasn't, until very recently. Like, within the past week. The timing confirmed Maxwell's suspicion that Rachel's sudden interest in the center was directly connected to his and Elijah's presence there. The question was why. Simple jealousy seemed too petty, even for Rachel. There had to be more to it. After the smoothies, Maxwell dropped Elijah at Marcus's house for their gaming night, then headed home to prepare for Amara's visit. He felt an unfamiliar nervousness as he surveyed the penthouse through fresh eyes, trying to imagine how it would appear to someone like Amara. The space was undeniably luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing panoramic city views, museum-quality art on the walls, furniture designed by renowned architects. Yet Catherine had always insisted on warmth over ostentation, choosing comfort and meaning over pure display. Family photos lined the bookshelves, Elijah's artwork from childhood hung proudly in the hallway, and Catherine's collection of handcrafted ceramics from local artists brought organic texture to the sleek surfaces. Still, there was no disguising the wealth represented in every corner. Maxwell wondered if inviting Amara here had been a mistake, if seeing his lifestyle so explicitly displayed would only emphasize the gulf between their worlds. Too late for second thoughts. He checked his watch, then headed to the kitchen to begin preparing dinner. He'd settled on a simple but elegant pasta with fresh vegetables and herbs, accompanied by a salad and crusty bread from an artisanal bakery downtown. Sophisticated enough to show effort, but not so elaborate as to seem like showing off. At precisely 7, the doorman called to announce Amara's arrival. Maxwell instructed him to send her up, then waited by the elevator, his heart beating with an urgency that seemed more appropriate for a teenager than a man in his 50s. When the doors slid open, Amara stepped out hesitantly. She'd changed since the dance class into a simple sundress with a denim jacket, her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a small gift bag and what appeared to be a dance bag. "Hi," she said, her eyes widening as she took in the apartment foyer with its marble floors and original Rothko on the wall. "Wow. Too much?" Maxwell asked, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just very you," she replied diplomatically, handing him the gift bag. "Wine. Nothing fancy, but it's one I like." The fact that she'd brought a bottle, despite knowing he likely had an extensive collection, touched Maxwell deeply. It was a gesture of equality, of contribution, rather than arriving empty-handed as a guest in a wealthier home. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Come in, please." As he led her through the apartment toward the open-concept living and dining area, Maxwell watched her take in the surroundings. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but he could see her cataloging details: the grand piano in the corner, Catherine's now rarely played, the wall of books, the family photos, the stunning city vista beyond the windows. "You have a beautiful home," she said finally. "Catherine deserves the credit," Maxwell replied honestly. "She designed everything, chose every piece. I've barely changed a thing since." He trailed off, but Amara nodded in understanding. "I can feel her in the space," she said softly. "It's warm, despite its grandeur. There's love here." The observation, so perceptive, so aligned with what Catherine had strived for, caught Maxwell off guard. "Yes," he managed. "That's exactly what she wanted." Amara approached the windows, gazing out at the city spread below them. The view is incredible. You can see the whole city from up here, including the community center, Maxwell pointed out, indicating a neighborhood to the east. And there? That's your apartment building, I think? Amara followed his gesture and laughed softly. Yes, that tiny speck in the distance. Different worlds indeed. The comment reminded Maxwell of their previous conversation about their disparate circumstances, but before he could respond, a timer chimed from the kitchen. That's our cue, he said. Dinner's ready for final assembly. Would you like to help, or would you prefer a glass of wine while you wait? I'll help, Amara decided, following him to the kitchen. I'm curious to see these cooking skills you claim to have. The kitchen was a chef's dream, commercial-grade appliances, marble countertops, and a central island large enough for serious food preparation. Amara took it all in with an appreciative whistle. I could fit my entire apartment in this kitchen, she joked, but there was no bitterness in her tone, just honest acknowledgement of the disparity. As they worked side by side, finishing the pasta and tossing the salad, Maxwell found himself relaxing. Amara moved with the same natural grace in his kitchen that she showed in the dance studio, comfortable and unaffected despite the luxurious surroundings. They carried their plates to the dining table, which Maxwell had set with simple elegance. Good china, but not the formal set. Crystal glasses, fresh flowers in a ceramic vase made by one of Catherine's favorite artists. Before we eat, Amara said, setting down her glass, I'd like to show you the changes I've made to my audition piece. Would that be okay, while I'm still warmed up from class? Of course, Maxwell agreed readily. Amara retrieved her dance bag and disappeared briefly to change. When she returned, she was wearing simple black dance clothes, fitted pants, and a loose top that allowed free movement. I can use any space, she said. Just need enough room to move. Maxwell led her to a section of the living room where the furniture created a natural open area on the hardwood floor. Will this work? Amara nodded, connecting her phone to the apartment's sound system with Maxwell's assistance. The changes are subtle, she explained, mostly in the middle section that felt awkward before. As the haunting cello music began, Amara closed her eyes briefly, centering herself just as she had in the studio. When she began to move, Maxwell was once again transfixed by the raw emotion and technical precision of her dance. The piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and ultimately triumph, themes Maxwell now recognized as deeply personal to Amara. The new transitions flowed more naturally, building to a climax that left her breathless and Maxwell momentarily speechless. Well, she asked when the music ended, her chest rising and falling with exertion. Even better than before, Maxwell said honestly. The new section adds vulnerability, makes the triumph at the end feel earned. Amara smiled, pleased by his insight. That's exactly what I was going for. The judges need to see technique, but also emotion, authenticity. They'd be fools not to accept you, Maxwell stated with such conviction that Amara laughed. From your lips to their ears, she said, gathering her hair back into a ponytail. I should change back. While she was gone, Maxwell served the pasta, which had been keeping warm in the oven, and opened the bottle of wine she'd brought, a modest but well-chosen Italian red. By the time Amara returned, the table was ready. This looks amazing, she said, taking her seat across from him. I'm impressed. Don't be too impressed until you've tasted it, Maxwell warned with a self-deprecating smile. I'm competent, not gifted. The pasta proved better than competent. The sauce was rich with fresh herbs and perfectly balanced flavors. Amara made appreciative noises as she took her first bite. Definitely more than competent, she assured him. This is delicious. Their conversation flowed easily over dinner, touching on subjects both light and profound. Amara shared stories of her early dance training, her mother's encouragement despite their limited resources, her dreams of someday opening a studio that would make dance accessible to everyone regardless of physical ability or financial means. Maxwell, in turn, spoke of his early business ventures, the risks he'd taken that had paid off beyond expectation, and his growing disillusionment with the corporate world despite his success within it. "Catherine always said I needed to find purpose beyond profit," he admitted, refilling their wine glasses. "The foundation was a start, but lately I've been thinking about more direct involvement." "Like what?" Amara asked, genuinely interested. Maxwell hesitated, then decided to share the idea that had been forming since their dinner at Rosemary's. "A fellowship program for working artists," he explained. "Not just traditional scholarships, but comprehensive support. Stipends, mentorship, performance opportunities, healthcare benefits." Amara's eyes widened. "That would be revolutionary. Do you know how many talented artists give up because they can't afford to live while pursuing their craft?" "I'm beginning to understand," Maxwell said, holding her gaze meaningfully. A flush colored Amara's cheeks, and she looked down at her plate. "It's a wonderful idea, truly. But it can't just be about talent. There would need to be consideration for those from underrepresented backgrounds, those without formal training but with raw ability." "I'd want you to help design it," Maxwell said, the idea crystallizing as he spoke. "Your perspective would be invaluable." Amara looked up sharply. "Me? I don't have any experience with grant programs or—" "But you have lived experience," Maxwell interrupted gently. "You know exactly what artists need because you're living it. That's expertise money can't buy." The proposition hung between them, weighty with implication. This wasn't just about a professional opportunity. It was Maxwell inviting Amara deeper into his world, creating a space where their different experiences could complement rather than divide them. After dinner, they moved to the living room with the remainder of the wine. Amara gravitated toward the family photos, studying them with undisguised interest. "Catherine was beautiful," she observed, picking up a frame that showed Maxwell, Catherine, and a young Elijah laughing on a beach. "You all look so happy here." "We were," Maxwell confirmed, coming to stand beside her. "That was in Maui, about a year before the accident. Elijah was 15, just starting to get serious about swimming." Amara set the photo down carefully, turning to face him. "Thank you for sharing your home with me tonight, and the meal, and your family's story." "Thank you for coming," Maxwell replied, suddenly aware of their proximity. "I've enjoyed every minute." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension, an awareness that had been building for days now demanding acknowledgement. Amara's eyes met his, her expression a mixture of attraction and uncertainty. "Maxwell," she began, her voice soft, "I should probably tell you—" The chirp of the elevator interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Moments later, Elijah wheeled into the living room, his expression animated. "Dad, you won't believe what—" He stopped short upon seeing Amara, surprise quickly giving way to a knowing smile. "Oh, hey, Amara. Didn't know you'd be here." "We had dinner," Maxwell explained, stepping back slightly from Amara. "After reviewing her audition piece." "Cool," Elijah said, his tone suggesting he found the situation more than just cool. "Sorry to interrupt. Marcus's mom got a migraine, so they drove me home early." "Not interrupting at all," Amara assured him, though Maxwell detected a hint of regret in her voice. "I should be heading out anyway. It's getting late." "I'll drive you," Maxwell offered immediately. "No need," she said, gathering her dance bag. "I can call a car service." "I insist," Maxwell countered. "It's no trouble." After a brief debate, Amara relented. She said goodbye to Elijah, who gave her a warm hug from his chair and extracted a promise about additional practice for the school demonstration. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Maxwell felt the unresolved tension from their interrupted moment still simmering beneath the surface. Whatever Amara had been about to tell him remained unspoken, creating a sense of suspended anticipation between them. The drive to her apartment was mostly silent, both of them seemingly lost in thought. When they arrived, Maxwell turned to her. "Amara, before Elijah came home, you were about to say something." She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. It doesn't matter. Not tonight. Before Maxwell could press further, she leaned across the center console and brushed her lips against his cheek, the barest whisper of a kiss, chaste but deliberate. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said softly, then slipped out of the car before he could respond. Maxwell watched her enter her building, his hand unconsciously rising to touch the spot where her lips had been. The simple gesture had communicated volumes, acknowledgement of the feelings growing between them, but also caution, restraint, a reminder of the complications they faced. As he drove home through the quiet city streets, Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had crossed a threshold tonight, one that made turning back increasingly difficult, regardless of the obstacles ahead. The morning of the school demonstration arrived with unexpected nerves for Maxwell. He found himself checking and rechecking Elijah's dance attire, making sure the wheelchair was perfectly maintained, and fretting about details his son had well under control. "Dad, relax," Elijah finally said, adjusting his navy blue performance shirt. "You're more nervous than I am." "Am I that obvious?" Maxwell asked, sheepishly setting down the tire pressure gauge he'd been using to check the wheelchair for the third time. "Completely," Elijah confirmed with a grin. "Is it because Amara will be there, or because you're worried about me?" "Both," Maxwell admitted. "This is your first public performance since the accident, and it's important to Amara professionally. I want everything to go perfectly." Elijah's expression softened. "It doesn't have to be perfect, Dad. That's what Amara keeps telling us. It just has to be authentic." The wisdom in his son's words, clearly influenced by Amara's philosophy, struck Maxwell deeply. When had Elijah become the one offering perspective? The school auditorium was packed when they arrived. Students, parents, faculty, and community members filled the seats, creating a buzz of anticipation. Maxwell spotted Linda waving from the front row, where she'd saved him a seat. "Nervous parent solidarity," she said as he joined her. "Zoe threw up twice this morning." "Elijah's surprisingly calm," Maxwell replied. "More so than me, anyway." "That's Amara's influence," Linda observed. "She has this way of making them see past the performance anxiety to the joy of expression." Backstage, Elijah joined the other dancers from the community center. Through the stage door, Maxwell caught glimpses of Amara moving among them, making final adjustments to costumes and offering words of encouragement. She looked focused and confident, completely in her element. The program began with a welcome from the school principal, followed by a brief introduction to Disability Awareness Week. Then the stage lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated Amara as she walked to center stage. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, our dancers will demonstrate that art knows no physical boundaries. Dance is about expression, communication, and joy, qualities that transcend any limitation. What you'll see today isn't about what these performers can't do. It's a celebration of what they can and do create through movement." As she stepped aside, the music began, a contemporary piece with a strong rhythm. Marcus and Jamal entered first, performing the partnered sequence they had rehearsed for weeks. Marcus, in his wheelchair, and Jamal, standing, created breathtaking patterns together, challenging preconceptions about what dance could look like. Several other performances followed, each showcasing different aspects of adaptive dance. Maxwell watched with growing amazement and pride, particularly struck by how the audience responded, not with the awkward, supportive applause often accorded to those with disabilities, but with genuine appreciation for the artistic quality of the performances. When Elijah and Zoe's turn came, Maxwell found himself holding his breath. They began in stillness, positioned at opposite ends of the stage. As the music swelled, a haunting piano piece that Amara had carefully selected, they began to move toward each other, Elijah controlling his wheelchair with fluid precision while Zoe navigated with her forearm crutches. Their dance told a story of isolation, discovery, and connection. The technical elements were impressive, but it was the emotional authenticity that captivated the audience. Elijah's face revealed concentration but also joy, his movements expressing something words never could. By the time they finished, with a beautifully synchronized final pose, the auditorium had fallen completely silent. Then, as if a dam broke, applause erupted, enthusiastic, genuine, and accompanied by more than a few tears among the audience members. Maxwell felt his own eyes growing damp. Beside him, Linda was openly crying. "They're magnificent," she whispered. The finale brought all the dancers together in a group piece that highlighted both individual expression and collective harmony. Amara had choreographed it brilliantly, ensuring each performer had moments to showcase their unique abilities while creating a cohesive whole. When the lights came up after the final bow, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Maxwell watched as Elijah beamed from the stage, exchanging triumphant looks with his fellow dancers. This wasn't pity or condescension. It was earned recognition of artistic achievement. As the crowd began to disperse, Maxwell made his way backstage to congratulate Elijah. The area buzzed with excited dancers and proud family members. He found his son surrounded by classmates, not just the other performers, but students from the school who had come to offer congratulations. "Dad," Elijah called when he spotted Maxwell. "Did you see? It worked perfectly." "You were incredible," Maxwell said, squeezing his son's shoulder. "Both of you," he added, nodding to Zoe, who stood nearby with her crutches, accepting compliments from a group of admirers. "It was all Amara," Elijah insisted. "She made us believe we could do it." Speaking of Amara, Maxwell scanned the backstage area, finally spotting her in conversation with several teachers. Before he could make his way toward her, however, a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Maxwell, what a moving performance." Rachel Hargrove approached, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that seemed excessive for a school assembly. Her smile was polished but didn't reach her eyes. "Rachel," Maxwell acknowledged coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "The community center is one of my charitable interests now," she reminded him. "I thought I should see the fruits of our programming firsthand." Before Maxwell could respond, Rachel turned to Elijah. "You were quite impressive, young man. Your mother would have been proud." The invocation of Catherine sent a jolt of anger through Maxwell, but Elijah merely nodded politely. "Thank you, Ms. Hargrove. I wonder," Rachel continued, her voice deceptively casual, "if you might introduce me to your instructor. I'd like to discuss potential funding opportunities for the adaptive dance program." Maxwell recognized the maneuver for what it was. Rachel seeking a legitimate reason to engage with Amara. He was about to intervene when Elijah spoke up. "She's pretty busy right now with the other dancers," his son said, a protective note in his voice that made Maxwell proud. "Maybe another time?" Rachel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I understand." She turned back to Maxwell. "Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner sometime soon. The Foundation's annual gala is coming up, and we're still finalizing the beneficiary programs." "Send the proposal to my office," Maxwell replied, deliberately professional. "My team will review it alongside other funding opportunities." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly at the dismissal. "As you wish." She glanced past him to where Amara was now approaching. "Ah, here's the woman of the hour, Ms. Collins. Congratulations on a remarkable performance." Amara, flushed with the success of the demonstration but looking wary, thanked Rachel politely. "I was just telling Maxwell that I'd like to discuss expanded funding for your program," Rachel continued. "The Community Center Board is very impressed with your work." "That's generous," Amara replied, her tone neutral. "The program could certainly use additional resources for specialized equipment and transportation assistance for participants." "Perhaps we could discuss specifics over coffee?" Rachel suggested. "I'd love to hear more about your background and training. It's so important for the board to understand the qualifications of our program leaders." The subtle emphasis on qualifications wasn't lost on Maxwell. Rachel was fishing for information, looking for leverage or weakness. "My schedule is quite full," Amara responded smoothly, "but I'm happy to provide any information the board needs through the center's director." Rachel's smile remained fixed, but Maxwell could see frustration in the slight tightening around her eyes. "Of course. Another time, perhaps." After Rachel departed, Amara released a small sigh. "She doesn't give up easily, does she?" "No," Maxwell agreed grimly. "She doesn't." Before they could discuss it further, Elijah called for Amara's attention. The dancers wanted a group photo to commemorate their success. Maxwell watched as she moved back to the group, her natural grace and genuine warmth evident in every interaction with her students. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Ms. Hargrove has been making inquiries about Ms. Collins' financial situation and employment history. Appears to be building a dossier. Thought you should know." A cold knot formed in Maxwell's stomach. Rachel was clearly planning something, and her interest in Amara went beyond simple jealousy or curiosity. He texted back quickly, "Keep me informed of any developments, and arrange a meeting with legal on Monday." As the backstage area gradually emptied, Amara approached Maxwell again, her expression more serious. "Can we talk? Not here, but soon?" "Of course," he replied, concerned by her tone. "Is everything all right?" She glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I received an email from the National Dance Academy this morning about my audition." Maxwell's heart sank, assuming the worst from her demeanor. "When will you know their decision?" "That's just it," Amara said, a strange mix of emotions playing across her face. "They've offered me a spot, without the final audition, based on a video someone sent them of my performance." "That's wonderful!" Maxwell exclaimed, genuinely delighted for her. "But why do you seem troubled?" "Because I didn't send them a video," Amara explained, her voice low. "The only people who've seen my audition piece are you and the dancers at my studio, and the Academy mentioned that the recommendation came with an offer of a substantial donation to their scholarship fund." Understanding dawned on Maxwell. "You think I pulled strings to get you in?" "Did you?" The directness of her question, delivered without accusation but with clear concern, struck him forcefully. "No," Maxwell answered truthfully. "I would never make that kind of intervention without your knowledge or consent. I understand how important it is for you to earn this on your own merit." Relief flickered across her face, quickly replaced by confusion. "Then who would have—" Her eyes widened with sudden realization. "Rachel Hargrove." "Rachel?" Maxwell repeated, surprised. "Why would she help you get into the academy?" "Not to help me," Amara said grimly. "To compromise me, to make it look like I'm using my connection to you for personal gain." She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident. "If I accept the spot, it appears that I'm taking advantage of your influence. If I decline, I give up the opportunity I've been working toward for years." The calculated cruelty of the maneuver was breathtaking. Rachel had found the perfect way to drive a wedge between them, using Amara's dream against her, twisting it into a source of conflict rather than celebration. "What will you do?" Maxwell asked quietly. Amara looked toward the stage where the last of her students were gathering their things, pride and purpose evident in their movements. "I don't know yet. Dance is my life, my dream, but integrity matters too." She met his gaze directly. "I need time to think." Maxwell nodded, respecting her need for space even as he worried about the decision she faced. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you, and I'll deal with Rachel." "That's part of the problem," Amara admitted softly. "Your world is full of Rachel Hargroves, people who use power and influence as weapons, who see relationships as transactions. I'm not sure I belong in that world, Maxwell, or if I want to." Before he could respond, Elijah called for her, needing assistance with something backstage. Amara squeezed Maxwell's hand briefly, then went to help. Left alone, Maxwell felt anger building within him, not just at Rachel's interference, but at the system that allowed such manipulations. A system he had benefited from and perpetuated throughout his business career. For the first time, he truly understood Amara's hesitation about their different worlds. It wasn't just about money or social status. It was about values, power dynamics, and the kind of life one chose to lead. As he watched Amara with the dancers, her natural habitat, where her integrity and talent spoke for themselves, Maxwell realized that preserving what was growing between them might require more than simply supporting her dreams. It might require fundamentally rethinking his own place in the world that Rachel Hargrove represented, and it would definitely require confronting Rachel directly about her interference, a conversation he intended to have very soon. Monday morning found Maxwell in his office earlier than usual, reviewing the documents Robert had compiled about Rachel's recent activities. The pattern was clear. Immediately after Maxwell's first dinner with Amara, Rachel had made strategic moves, joining the community center board, contacting the National Dance Academy with both video evidence of Amara's talent and the promise of a substantial donation, and quietly investigating Amara's background. The thoroughness of her approach was almost admirable, in a coldly calculating way. Rachel had recognized something in Maxwell's interest in Amara that had triggered this comprehensive response. The question was why? What threat did she perceive that warranted such elaborate countermeasures? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Richardson, Ms. Hargrove is here to see you," his assistant announced. "Perfect timing," Maxwell murmured. "Send her in." Rachel entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding any room she entered. Her tailored dress and impeccable accessories projected the polished image she carefully maintained. "Maxwell, thank you for seeing me without an appointment," she began, taking a seat across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. "I wanted to discuss the Foundation Gala." "Actually," Maxwell countered, closing the folder before him, "I'd prefer to discuss your recent interest in Amara Collins." Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. "I don't know what you mean." "Let's not waste time with denials," Maxwell said evenly. "I know about your sudden appointment to the Community Center Board, your research into Amara's background, and most significantly, your intervention with the National Dance Academy." A brief flicker of surprise crossed Rachel's face before her composure returned. "I'm simply doing due diligence on programs the Foundation might support. As for the Academy, I happened to see Ms. Collins perform and was impressed. I have connections there and made a recommendation. I thought you'd be pleased given your interest in her career." The calculated ambiguity of the situation wasn't lost on me, Maxwell replied, his voice cooling. "Offering her admission in a way that makes it appear I used my influence puts her in an impossible position, which I suspect was exactly your intention." Rachel studied him for a moment, then sighed, dropping some of her pretense. "Maxwell, we've known each other for 20 years. I'm acting out of concern, not malice. This woman appears in your life suddenly, gains access to your son, your home, and potentially your fortune. And I'm the villain for asking questions?" "She didn't appear in my life," Maxwell corrected. "She taught my son to dance again, to feel joy in movement he thought was lost to him forever, and she's shown no interest whatsoever in my wealth or status. Quite the opposite, in fact." "Of course she hasn't," Rachel scoffed. "That would be amateur. The long game is much more effective." Maxwell felt his patience thinning. "Not everyone operates with your level of calculation, Rachel. Some people are simply authentic. In my experience, authenticity is usually a carefully constructed facade," Rachel replied, crossing her legs elegantly. "But let's say you're right. Let's say Ms. Collins has no interest in your money or position. Have you considered what that means?" "Enlighten me," Maxwell said, his tone clipped. "It means she wants you to abandon your world for hers," Rachel explained as if to a child. "The community center, the struggling artist's life, the noble poverty. She's not climbing up to your level, she's pulling you down to hers." The harsh assessment hung in the air between them. Maxwell took a moment to consider his response, recognizing a grain of truth buried within Rachel's cynical perspective. There was indeed a fundamental tension between his world and Amara's, but not in the way Rachel framed it. "You're right about one thing," he finally said. "Amara has made me question aspects of my life that I've taken for granted, the values I prioritize, the systems I participate in." He leaned forward. "But that's not a threat, Rachel. It's an opportunity for growth." Rachel's expression turned pitying. "This is exactly why Catherine was so good for you. She understood your world, complemented it. She elevated you without trying to fundamentally change you." At the mention of his late wife, Maxwell felt a surge of clarity rather than the pain such comparisons usually triggered. "You didn't know Catherine as well as you think. She challenged me constantly, pushed me to consider perspectives outside my privilege. The foundation wasn't my idea. It was hers." Standing, Maxwell moved to the window overlooking the city. "Catherine would have liked Amara," he said softly, echoing Elijah's assessment from weeks earlier. "They share the same essential quality, seeing people for who they are, not what they represent." "And who exactly are you, Maxwell?" Rachel asked, her voice unusually gentle. "The titan of industry? The grieving widower? The devoted father? Or this new version who's questioning everything because of a dance instructor?" The question was surprisingly insightful. Who was he, at his core? For years after Catherine's death, he'd defined himself primarily through his roles, CEO, father, philanthropist, rather than engaging with the deeper question of his identity and values. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "But I know this. I won't allow you to interfere with Amara's career or my relationship with her, whatever form that takes." Rachel stood, gathering her purse with deliberate movements. "I see you've made up your mind. Just remember, Maxwell, when you blur the boundaries between your worlds, it's not only your heart at risk. There's Elijah to consider, your company, your position in society." "I'm well aware of the considerations," Maxwell replied firmly, "and I'd appreciate if you'd resign from the community center board. Your presence there serves no purpose now." "As you wish," Rachel conceded, moving toward the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong about her. Truly." After she left, Maxwell remained by the window, contemplating their conversation. Rachel's warnings, though self-serving, weren't entirely without merit. Bridging the gap between his world and Amara's would require more than just feelings. It would demand real structural changes, compromises, and a willingness to reimagine aspects of his life he'd long taken for granted. The question was whether Amara would give them the chance to navigate those challenges together, or if Rachel's interference had already created too wide a rift. His phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "Zoe says Amara canceled Saturday's class. Haven't heard from her since the demonstration. Something wrong?" Maxwell's concern deepened. 3 days of silence wasn't like Amara, especially regarding her students. He tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. After a moment's hesitation, he decided on a more direct approach. 2 hours later, Maxwell found himself in front of Amara's apartment building, feeling uncomfortably like a stalker, but too worried to simply wait for her to reach out. After buzzing her apartment with no response, he was about to leave when a young woman exited the building. "Are you looking for Amara?" she asked, recognition dawning on her face. "You're Elijah's dad, right? I saw you at the demonstration." "Yes," Maxwell confirmed, relieved. "I'm concerned about her. She's not returning calls." The woman, presumably Amara's roommate, hesitated. "She's been processing some stuff. The dance academy thing. She's actually at her studio right now. The one where you saw her audition piece? Said she needed space to think." "Thank you," Maxwell said sincerely, turning to go. "Hey," the roommate called after him. "Whatever's going on with you two, she hasn't smiled this much in years. Just so you know." The small vote of confidence bolstered Maxwell's resolve as he drove to the converted storefront studio. When he arrived, he could see Amara through the windows, dancing alone to music he couldn't hear from outside. Her movements were sharp, almost angry, so different from the fluid grace of her usual style. He knocked on the glass door, causing her to startle mid-movement. When she saw him, her expression cycled through surprise, wariness, and finally resignation as she came to let him in. "How did you find me?" she asked, wiping sweat from her forehead with a small towel. "Your roommate," Maxwell admitted. "I was worried when you canceled class." Amara sighed, moving to turn off the music. "I needed time to think. About the academy offer. About everything." "And have you reached any conclusions?" Maxwell asked, remaining near the door to give her space. "Several, actually." She took a drink from her water bottle before continuing. "First, I'm declining the academy offer." "Amara," she held up a hand to stop his protest. "It's not because of how it came about. It's because I realized something while choreographing the school demonstration. I love teaching more than performing. Seeing Elijah, Zoe, all of them discover movement that expresses their unique bodies and spirits. That brings me more joy than any solo career could." Maxwell absorbed this, recognizing the authenticity in her words. "What will you do instead?" "That's my second conclusion," Amara continued. "I'm going to pursue a master's in adaptive dance therapy. There's a program at the university that would allow me to keep teaching while I study. It's still competitive, but—" She smiled slightly. "Legitimately within reach based on my experience." "That sounds perfect for you," Maxwell said sincerely. "And your other conclusions?" Amara's expression grew more serious. "That's where it gets complicated, because my third realization involves you, Maxwell." His heart quickened. "I'm listening." "I care about you," she said simply. "More than I expected to, and certainly more than is wise given our circumstances. But Rachel's manipulation made me see something clearly. I can't fully enter your world without compromising who I am, and I won't ask you to abandon yours." "What if we created something new instead?" Maxwell suggested, taking a tentative step toward her. "Not my world or yours, but a shared space where both of us can grow." Amara looked skeptical. "That sounds idealistic in theory, but in practice, the Rachel Hargroves of your world will always see me as an interloper, and my community will always question whether I've sold out." "Only if we let external judgments define us," Maxwell countered. "I've spent 3 years existing rather than living, Amara. You and Elijah both helped me see that. I'm not willing to retreat back into that half-life because of other people's expectations." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This contains the proposal for the fellowship program we discussed. I've spent the past few days refining it, incorporating what I've learned from you about the challenges working artists face." Amara took it, looking confused. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I'd like you to direct it," Maxwell said. "Not as a favor to me, but because you're uniquely qualified to understand both the artistic and practical needs of the recipients." Her eyes widened. "Maxwell, I don't have any experience running a grant program." "You have the lived experience of the people it would serve," he replied. "The administrative details can be learned. The insight you bring is invaluable." "And us?" Amara asked softly. "Is this a professional offer only?" Maxwell took another step closer. "That depends entirely on you. I want both, the professional partnership and the personal relationship, but I'll respect whatever boundaries you need." Amara was quiet for a long moment, studying him intently. There would need to be clear separation between any personal relationship and the fellowship program. No appearance of favoritism or impropriety. "Absolutely," Maxwell agreed immediately. "And we would need to move slowly," she continued. "Get to know each other in ordinary settings, not just your penthouse or charity galas." "I make a decent picnic," Maxwell offered with a hopeful smile. "And I've been told the botanical gardens are lovely this time of year." A reluctant smile tugged at Amara's lips. "You're not making this easy." "I don't want easy," Maxwell said, closing the remaining distance between them. I want real, messy, complicated, authentic, like that first dance you shared with Elijah, the one that changed everything. Amara's expression softened at the memory. That was pure instinct. I saw his longing, his loss. I just wanted to show him that different doesn't mean less. You showed us both that, Maxwell said quietly. And if you'll let me, I'd like to discover what we might create together. In the fellowship program, in our relationship, in the space between our worlds. He held out his hand, an echo of the moment she had extended hers to Elijah at the gala, an invitation, not a demand, a beginning rather than a conclusion. Amara looked at his offered hand, then up to his eyes, searching for something only she could define. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she placed her hand in his, fingers intertwining. No promises, she warned, though her eyes had softened, except that I'll be honest about what works and what doesn't. That's all I ask, Maxwell replied, feeling the warmth of her hand in his like a lifeline. The studio door opened suddenly, and they turned to find Elijah in the doorway, slightly breathless. Finally, he exclaimed, taking in their joined hands with evident satisfaction. Do you have any idea how exhausting it's been watching you two dance around each other for weeks? Elijah, Maxwell began, embarrassed. How did you… Zoe dropped me off, his son explained, wheeling further into the studio. She said Amara needed a kick in the butt almost as much as you do, Dad. Amara laughed, a free, unguarded sound that filled the small studio with warmth. Your son has your talent for dramatic timing, she told Maxwell. And my mother's bluntness, Elijah added proudly. She always said life's too short for unnecessary detours. Maxwell felt a pang of gratitude for Catherine's continuing influence in their son and for Elijah's unabashed support of his growing relationship with Amara. Since you're both here, Amara said, moving to the speaker system, I could use some feedback on a new piece I'm developing. For the first fellowship showcase, perhaps? As she queued up the music, Elijah positioned his wheelchair beside his father, looking up with a knowing smile. She's special, Dad, he whispered. Don't mess it up. I'll do my best, Maxwell promised, his eyes on Amara as she moved to the center of the studio. The music began, something classical but with contemporary undertones, and Amara closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. When she began to dance, Maxwell recognized elements of her previous piece, but transformed. The struggle was still present, but no longer dominated the narrative. Instead, there was an unmistakable theme of connection, of disparate elements finding harmony without losing their essential nature. As her movement built to its climax, Amara incorporated her entire body in a sequence that spoke of liberation and possibility. The final moments found her with arms extended, palms up, an offering, an invitation, a new beginning. When the music faded, both Maxwell and Elijah applauded spontaneously. Amara took a small, almost shy bow. That was beautiful, Maxwell said, the simple words inadequate to express what he'd felt watching her. It's still developing, Amara replied, slightly breathless. Like everything important. Their eyes met across the studio, and in that moment, Maxwell understood that they were embarking on a dance of their own, one without predetermined steps or guaranteed outcomes, but with the potential for beauty neither could create alone. Outside the studio windows, afternoon sunlight filtered through spring leaves, casting dappled shadows across the worn wooden floor. Three people from vastly different circumstances stood in that shifting light. A wounded boy finding new ways to move through the world, a dancer whose gift was helping others find their own rhythm, and a man discovering that his greatest wealth had nothing to do with his financial empire. None of them could know exactly where this new dance would lead. But as they left the studio together, Elijah rolling between them, already planning future performances and projects, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced since before Catherine's death. The the simple, profound joy of moving forward in step with people who saw him for who he truly was. And for now, that was more than enough. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen